Good morning, hello, and you're very welcome to the Ag Science Association Annual Conference 2021. You know, it's hard to believe it's 12 months since we were here, well, we were in Cork, and we thought, well, we're going to be all together again a year later. But alas, we are here, but again virtually, but we're in a sort of a recent spiritual home of the ASA here in the Killashee Hotel in Naas in County Kildare. Now, we have a wonderful lineup of speakers for you coming up over the next 2.5 hours, and I do hope that you can stay with us. It's great to see a virtually full house again here this year. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can go to hashtag ASA21, and you will have a chance there of winning a hamper. There's a hamper competition in association with Alltech. So I hope you can stay with us between now and about 12:30. But to open proceedings here at this conference, sponsored once again this year by FBD, I'm going to hand you over to the President, Anne-Marie Butler.
Follow ye orv Armagin, agus Falcherove, quick cogal on ASA Fehefe Hain. It is indeed an honour to welcome you to the ASA Conference 2021, which will assess the role that science can play in driving innovation and addressing challenges in our agri-food sector. While it is regrettable that we cannot meet up this morning, I thank you for joining us in such large numbers and for inviting ASA into your homes, places of employment and businesses. Sincere thanks to our loyal conference partner, FBD, for their continued valued support. We find ourselves today at an unusual juncture in agriculture. We have rarely experienced a more positive time for virtually all commodities, which continue to enjoy strong performance, buoyant demand, and positive economic returns. Yet a cloud of uncertainty, worry, and negativity hangs above our agri-food sector. Our sector faces huge challenges, and it is widely recognised that our producers, processors, and indeed consumers are all going to need to make continued changes to behaviours and practices in order to move the dial. However, any required changes to our sector must be based on solid science, informed knowledge, and validated data. President Dwight D. Eisenhower famously quoted, "Farming looks mighty easy when your plough is a pencil and you're 1,000 miles from the cornfield." If we take a moment to reflect on what science has delivered for humanity and agriculture over recent centuries, the examples are ubiquitous. Nuclear energy, vaccines, electric technology, reproductive technologies, mechanization, pasteurization, antibiotics and sensors, to name but a few. And in my view, it is science which will provide the solutions to our current and future challenges. Never has science been needed more. We are incredibly fortunate as a nation to have a proven track record in developing world-class scholars and experts across all academic disciplines. Through the continued commitment of our educational and training bodies, I believe that we will continue to produce scientific experts who collaborate internationally and who will inform, guide, and shape policy discussion. Today's conference seeks to further explore, deepen, and develop the potential of science to drive innovation and address sector challenges. I welcome and sincerely thank all conference speakers, sponsors, and participants for joining us today. Legendary GAA commentator Micheál Mar Hertig recently advised, "Dúiseach le dúrach le bracha an lei." Wake with enthusiasm at the dawning of the day. At ASA, we look forward with enthusiasm to supporting our members through the fog and into the light of a pathway of doing more with less, producing more nutritious products that have a higher value in the market while progressing to climate neutrality. I hope you enjoyed today's lively discussions on the role that science can play in this journey, and thank you sincerely for joining us.
Anne-Marie, thank you very much indeed, and congratulations on a great year in trying circumstances as President of the ASA to you and your committee. Okay, well, this time last year he was just settling in to his new job as Minister for Agriculture, and he was hoping to kind of maybe outlast his predecessors in that role. Well, he's certainly done that. A year on, Minister Charlie McConalogue is with us once again for the opening address. Now, he can't actually be with us here. He's at the Fianna Fáil Think In the Slieve Russell Hotel in County Cavan, where we go to now live To address the ASA Conference 2021, Minister for Agriculture, Charlie McConnell.
Good morning, Damien, and Madam President Anne-Marie, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests and delegates watching across the country, and indeed across the globe. I'm delighted to be able to join you here this morning. And as you mentioned, Damien, very marginally over a year ago, I was just appointed, and actually the Agricultural Science Association conference last year was the first formal engagement I had completed and engaged in as minister. So it's a delight to be back with you all here this year. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person. Obviously, we have our two-day think in Cavan here at the moment, a county which you have great attachment to, I know. And so listen, sorry I can't actually be with you, but certainly I want to congratulate you and Anne-Marie on a very productive year over the past one, and indeed wish George well as the incoming president as well. Thankfully, of course, as well, we've seen massive progress over the last number of years in terms of the national vaccination program. I think it'd be fair to say this time last year we hope not to have the challenges that we'd had over the course of the last year, but certainly I think the country has responded really well in terms of responding to those challenges. And thankfully, with the very successful rollout of the vaccination program now, we're in a very strong space to move forward. And I think certainly it's an encouragement for all to see the pathway ahead and the light finally at the other side and emerging out of the tunnel, hopefully. With some of the brightest and best brains from the sector attending today's conference, and it's a genuine honour to be able to speak before such an august and impressive group of leaders. Your ability to create and disseminate cutting-edge practices will ensure that our sector will thrive in the years to come, and that's something that I'm very certain of. The scientific sector will take on an even more significant role in the coming months and years ahead as we rise now together to meet the challenges that we face, and I will touch more on that later. I recently had the pleasure of launching the History of the Irish Agricultural Advisory Services book, and it's a great insight into just how over the last 100 years, between 1900 and 2000, Irish agriculture became a leading and dynamic global force. It was backed by educated and informed farmers who were at the forefront of progress and were synonymous with pioneering spirit. In 1900, agriculture in Ireland was underdeveloped compared to our urban and more industrialised neighbours. But this changed dramatically throughout the 20th century, with agriculture going through a series of evolutions and indeed revolutions since then. The tractor replaced the horse, the combine replaced the thrasher. Even when bale silage and wrapping became the new kid in the block in the mid-1980s, this seemed like a monumental change to a lot of farmers. And there were plenty who said it couldn't be done, it can't happen. But it could be done, and it did happen. And it's fair to say that we're facing into a period like no other now for our great sector. A sector that touches off every rural parish in the country, and that generates over 14 billion euro in exports. And a sector that supports hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country. Like in 1900, we're facing into a period of great challenge and transition. And with that challenge does come opportunity too. With the skill set of farmers and our agricultural science professionals, I'm absolutely convinced that we will meet these challenges head on and that we will flourish. Over the coming months, some of the most significant policy decisions affecting Irish agriculture will play out. By the end of the year, we must complete our new CAP programme in order to have it in place for the start of 2023. It's the most ambitious CAP ever in terms of responsibilities and ambitions around addressing climate change, as well as biodiversity and water quality decline. I'm currently engaging with farmers and the representatives, as well as other stakeholders, in devising a CAP strategic plan that works for our farm families and our environment. Separately, I'm working constructively with my cabinet colleagues to ensure that the implementation of the Climate Action Plan will see the unique status of Irish agriculture taken into account when forming carbon budgets. I need to first recognise, though, the positive environmental action engaged in over many years by farmers and support them in taking the further steps required now to meet our increased ambition. Our farmers continue to be genuine pioneers in this area. Yes, all sectors must play their part, and the narrative that agriculture should be singled out for having a greater healthy climate is unfair and wrong. And of course, every sector, including agriculture, will have to make a real contribution if we are to reach our climate objectives. But the creation of a narrative that alienates our farmers is unhelpful. We must work together in this if we want it to work. In my experience, farmers are custodians of the land and want to contribute positively to the environment. I'm very proud that the agriculture sector is the first sector in Ireland to produce a credible roadmap transitioning the sector towards our long-term ambition of climate neutrality by 2050, fully in line with programme for government commitments. Acclimatise will continue to play a pivotal role as we move forward on this journey. Our agri-food sector is dominated by livestock, with 80% of our agricultural area under permanent grassland, underpinning our world-famous grass-based production system, producing beef and dairy products that are exported to 180 countries around the world. And the sector accounts for 8% of all employment and 10% of all exports that leave Ireland very much agri-food based. The recently launched Food Vision forecast our agri-food exports to grow to 21 billion over the next decade, with our existing world-class farming and food production models at the core of the strategy. These key policy decisions will leave an indelible mark on agriculture, but I entirely reject the notion that any of these would have to be negative or destructive. We will evolve and we will change and we will transition and adapt, but this will be for the better. Colleagues in the agriculture sector and members of the ASA, I am excited about that future. This decade will be a decade of change for Irish agriculture, but I can assure you that in 10 years' time, even in 20 years' time and beyond, producing the highest of quality meat and milk protein will remain the bedrock of Ireland's agri-food industry. This will be backed by our own ambition for a vibrant tillage sector as well. By delivering on the ambitious vision set out in the Acclimatise roadmap and the upcoming Climate Action Plan towards climate neutrality, we can protect the Irish family farm for generations to come, as well as protecting our environment. Change is inevitable and change is a constant. And I will absolutely back our sector and our farmers at every step along this journey. And I know also that our agricultural scientists will be at the front line of this change. So Anne-Marie, I congratulate you on an excellent year in charge in what were hugely difficult conditions. The Agricultural Science Association is a vibrant and exciting body, and you can all be as excited as I am for the time ahead. And I wish you the very best of luck for the day and indeed for the next year, and to George as incoming president. Thanks, Damien.
Sir, thank you very much indeed for that opening address, and I'm happy that you can stay with us for a few minutes. I suppose maybe just to dwell on some of the points that you've been making, and of course the title of this year's event is Science Driving Innovation, and also finding solutions, I suppose, for agri-food into the future as well. And later we have Tom Vilsack, the US Secretary of State for Agriculture, speaking to us. And the focus will be on the future and sustainable food production and reducing agri-emissions. Just on that, there's a lot of talk in recent weeks. It's becoming more prominent now, this issue regarding the attribution of carbon to production rather than consumption. Is there a need for a global rethink on that issue, that food carbon should be calculated on the basis of consumption rather than where it's produced?
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point, Damien, and it's something that does need to be very much part of the conversation internationally in the time ahead, because it is unfair in ways that a country such as our own, which has a very sustainable and produces food really sustainably with a much lower carbon footprint than other countries. So, for example, in relation to beef and dairy, where we're #1 across Europe in terms of the carbon footprint, and where we export 90% of that, yet it's very much part of our national profile in terms of the current accounting mechanisms. But as everyone will know, in terms of those accounting mechanisms, they're very hard and very challenging to achieve, or to achieve change to, and that's a gradual process, but one that will be very much participated in the years ahead. And of course, if we look at how, for example, oil is accounted for, that's based on the country that consumes it, as opposed to the country that produces it, which is different from the way the production of food. But having said that, it's very clear that every sector is going to have to play its part in relation to what is a very real challenge and a very real crisis facing the globe in relation to weather change and climate change. And agriculture, like every other sector of the economy, has to play its part in addressing that challenge. And we have set out a very ambitious, and we will be a target at national level, and one as the climate action plan is finalised now in the next number of weeks and month or so, one that will have every sector will have to play its part in, including agriculture. But what's really clear is that whether the accounting for that is done at national level or indeed transferred to in the years ahead to the countries in which it's consumed, every consumer wants to see the footprint of the food they're producing reduced, because that's really important that that happens in order to play the part and our sector's part globally and internationally in relation to addressing the climate change challenge. So either way, the direction we have to travel is exactly the same, which is about becoming even more sustainable and reducing the footprint of the food that we produce. So the challenge is exactly the same, and the direction is exactly the same, that we must go on, particularly as an exporting nation, where the value of that food we produce will be very much linked to its sustainability by those consumers in other countries who will be consuming it. So it's the same direction and the same challenge, although I do think the accounting mechanism certainly is something which needs to evolve as time moves on.
Okay, and we'll see what happens with the climate action plan down the road, and of course there's the farm to fork policy. There's so many different policies, so many different layers coming at us all into the future, and hopefully for the better for everybody. I was reading Bill O'Keefe's column in the Farmers Journal this week, and he's lamenting the fact there's no ploughing next week. Well, there is ploughing, but the crowds won't be there to, I suppose, go and meet the likes of yourself and politicians and point out the frustration that farmers are having, the contradictions in policy that farmers have to deal with now. For example, the nitrates action programme proposals. Is there anything that you can say to allay the fears of farmers now about what's coming down the road in terms of changes in that regard, along with an awful lot of other policy changes, which is bamboozling and confusing farmers?
Yeah, well, what I would say is, like, obviously there's a lot of challenges there, and I referred to that in my speech. And those are challenges which farmers are embracing, and it's important as well that we embrace them and succeed in setting a sustainable direction for our food sector. It's really important we do that to make sure that we continue to be at the forefront as a top producer of food internationally and globally, and maintain our position globally in that and build on it. But it has been more challenging over the last year, obviously, to engage face-to-face with farmers. Obviously, the ploughing championships are always a wonderful opportunity to do that. I know that while the ploughing will happen, we won't have that opportunity this year. But certainly, I have been engaging very closely with farmers throughout the past year, and particularly now over the next number of weeks as well. I just spent all day yesterday meeting with, and Tuesday meeting with all of the farm organisations. We'll be meeting more stakeholders next week. But over the next number of weeks and months, I'll be getting out around the counties, around the country again, to listen and to talk to farmers directly on these issues. Obviously, the nitrates review is an important one. It does bring its challenges, but there's no doubt whatsoever that in terms of how we manage our land and manage our farming practice, that we have to ensure that it's done in a way that maintains and improves water quality. But we have to be sensitive, obviously, to the impact that has for farmers. Right. We have to be sensitive in relation to how we support them to achieve that. But I know we're all agreed in the fact that those key benchmarks, such as water quality, have to go in the right direction and have to be central to how we carry out our farming practices. So there's important challenges there, Damien, over the next period of time. Yeah. There is, farmers obviously can be concerned about that, but they have my absolute assurance that my ears will be open at all stages, and we will plot a way forward that works for our agricultural sector and puts it in a very strong footing to grow in the years ahead.
All right, and one final question, very briefly, Minister. It's in relation to the Common Agricultural Policy, which is a little bit in flux at the moment. We're coming near the end of it now, the trilogue. As you said, you've met the farm groups this week. I'm sure you got differing opinions. Are you satisfied that it's a fair cap deal for all farmers, considering that convergence is such a hot topic in this country?
Yeah, I think it is a very balanced deal, and I fought very hard at European level at the council meetings and working with colleagues to try and ensure that it would be flexible enough to allow member states to frame national CAP strategic plans that work for farmers domestically. So obviously there's significant changes there, and overall, without a doubt, there is much more significant environmental ambition in this CAP, and that's absolutely appropriate that there is, because like all sectors, how we are sustainable and how we interact with the environment and play our role has to be really important in relation to how we develop and grow into the future. But it has to work for families and farmers, and key and central to all of that is farm family income. And I believe that we do this right, and I'm engaged very, very closely with everyone and all stakeholders to ensure we do that. We can actually develop and add value to our farming sector and ultimately ensure that the profit margins are there for primary producers, which is going to be really important. So it's a challenging time, but it's one, we do have a tremendous reputation internationally for being an exceptionally strong and world-leading food producer. That's something we must not only maintain, but build upon and remain world-leading in that regard. And getting our CAP right is going to be important in relation to that, and getting the platform, the sustainable platform on which we continue to build our sector is going to be really important. And key to that is all of us working together over the next time ahead. And of course, key to that as well is the massive role which agricultural scientists will play in that process, working with farmers, developing those ideas as they have done for years and decades in our development in the past.
Okay, Minister Charlie McConalogue, thank you very much for joining us from Ballyconnell. I hope Fianna Fáilers didn't confuse the great welcome that was there the other evening, that it was for them. It was in fact, of course, for Leona Maguire, who's up there beside you. So.
We were there to welcome her as well, Damien.
Okay, all right.
A great achievement.
Enjoy your time there. Thank you very much. That's the Minister for Agriculture and Food, Charlie McConalogue. Now to our keynote speaker, and we're going to cross the pond to the USA. Tom Vilsack was the longest serving member of the Barack Obama cabinet from 2009 until, well, we saw what happened in 2016, but he held the position, of course, until February 2017 when the Trump administration came in. But now he has been nominated once again by Joe Biden to become the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture in the United States, and he will serve that position once again. In between, he was CEO of the US Dairy Export Association. Now, we're going to have a panel discussion coming up with Dr. Harry Clark and also with Michael Scannell. Harry Clark, of course, in New Zealand. Michael Scannell is in Brussels, and they will tease out some of the points which Mr. Vilsack is going to make in his keynote address now to the Agricultural Science Association Annual Conference 2021.
I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in the Agricultural Science Association's annual conference and to share a few thoughts with you today. Throughout the globe, we have all been greatly impacted by the challenges from COVID-19's pandemic and have undertaken significant efforts to maintain a resilient food supply chain. As we look to the future of agriculture, it is critically important we continue to work together to support science-based decision-making and promote innovative tools and technologies to ensure a more sustainable, competitive, and resilient agricultural production system. The United States aims to be a partner in these efforts and in tackling some of the greatest challenges in front of us. Now, I was pleased to meet with Ireland's Ag Minister this spring, and our two countries continue to work together to maintain a strong partnership. Climate crisis brings forth threats and opportunities to the agricultural sector. And agriculture is an essential partner in the U.S. goal to reach net zero emissions by 2050, with significant reductions by 2030, based on President Biden's commitment at the April Leaders Summit on Climate. Under the Biden and Harris administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is engaged in a whole of government effort to combat the climate crisis and conserve and protect our nation's lands, biodiversity, and natural resources, including our soil, air, and water. We're very focused on putting food and agriculture and forestry at the heart of this administration's efforts to tackle climate by offering climate-smart solutions that are producer and market-focused. The President and the White House believe that food, agriculture, and forestry will play a major role in addressing climate change. This includes carrying out our vision for a climate-smart agriculture and forestry that is farmer-focused, locally led, and centered on voluntary incentives, helping producers build resiliency, mitigating emissions, and conserving natural resources. Domestic strategies include no-till farming and rotational grazing, land conservation, and carbon storage and sequestration, among others. And we recognize the importance of cooperation and collaboration in global efforts to address the climate change challenge. The 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, COP26, is a critical example where cooperation is strong and necessary. I'm pleased to highlight the new initiative, the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, that the United States and the United Arab Emirates joining together to launch at COP26. Now, the goal of the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate is to increase and accelerate global innovation and research and development in agriculture and food systems in support of climate action. To achieve this goal, participants intend to catalyze greater investment in and/or other support for agricultural innovation and research and development to help raise global ambition and accelerate transformational change in our countries, including by enabling science-based and data-driven decision and policy making. Additionally, at USDA, we're engaged in fulfilling a domestic imperative for action to enhance sustainability across all three dimensions: environmental, social, and economic. Efforts include the conversion of agricultural commodities, residues, and waste into value-added products and renewable energy production. With the Biden-Harris administration's goal of conserving 30% of U.S. lands and waters by 2030, through voluntary incentive-based conservation programs on working lands, we can create market opportunities, new economies, thousands of jobs, while protecting our future. At the same time, we're engaging in sustainable forest management. U.S. wood pellets, as a byproduct of wood manufacturing, are sustainably made from low-value, small-diameter logging residues that would otherwise have been discarded. Biotechnology also plays a critical role in creating new products to combat climate change and increase sustainability. Biotechnology can be used to develop biofuel crops that require fewer fossil fuel inputs to grow. For example, new oilseed crop varieties are being developed that have lighter oil content for joint use as cover crops and biofuel. Plants developed with biotechnology can adapt to changing environmental conditions such as drought, salinity, heat, and other stressors, as well as lowering the need for inputs that contribute to carbon emissions. And the adoption of certain plants, animals, and microbes developed with biotechnology can have follow-on effects that further reduce environmental impacts. For example, non-browning or reduced spoiling plant varieties increase the shelf life of fresh produce and reduce food waste. New tools such as genome editing also have clear benefits to the agricultural production system. They drive innovation and can increase global agricultural resiliency. Many countries, including the United States, are revisiting their agricultural biotechnology regulations in response to scientific developments in genome editing. The EU is considering a path forward for some use of genome editing in agriculture as well. Gene editing shows exciting potential to offer new tools to combat animal disease challenges, which remain critical as livestock production systems adapt to a changing climate. And finally, the United States commends the high-level objectives of the Farm to Fork and Biodiversity Strategy, shares the EU's commitment to sustainability and addressing climate change, while recognizing that while we share the same goal, that there may well be different ways to get to that goal. While the United States supports trade-friendly sustainability and climate practices, we continue to stress the need for appropriate assessment of risk and impact, for science-based regulatory frameworks, and the importance of innovation and new technology methods to meet the EU's ambitious goals. USDA and the European Commission's Director General for Agriculture have discussed the possibility of formalizing high-level bilateral engagements to tackle the bilateral and global challenges facing the EU and U.S. farmers, not the least among them being climate change and sustainability. With the 21st century science, innovation, and tools we have available, we can make the agricultural sector greener, more resilient, and more competitive. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to share how the United States and the U.S. Department of Agriculture are focused on ensuring sustainable and resilient agricultural production practices in the future. I hope you have a meaningful and productive conference as we continue this work together to put agriculture at the front of the solutions to the challenges we all face.
Tom Vilsack, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, thank you so much for the keynote address to this year's ASA conference. Now, we're going to be joined in a couple of moments by Michael Scannell, who's Deputy Director at DG Agri. And we're also joined as well from New Zealand by Dr. Harry Clark, who's Director of the New Zealand Agriculture Greenhouse Gas Research Centre. But before that, for you watching in, we have a question and we'd like you to get involved. Can Irish agriculture continue to meet the growing global demands while complying with climate change ambition? Can Irish agriculture continue to meet the growing global demands while complying with climate change ambition? And remember, hashtag ASA21 for all social media comments and posts that you'd like to make. So as I said, we're going to move on to our first of 3 panel discussions here today, and I'm delighted to say we're joined from different parts of the world. First of all, by Irishman Michael Scannell, who's Deputy Director General at DG Agri in Brussels, and from New Zealand by Dr. Harry Clark, Director of the New Zealand Agriculture Greenhouse Gas Research Centre. Gentlemen, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and thank you very much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
Well, I'm going to take a seat here now because we're going to have a chat for a while. Michael, good to see you there in Brussels. Sorry you can't be here with us, but just listening to Secretary Vilsack there, it's a speech, when I listen to it, it could have been written and it could have been delivered by any Minister for Agriculture around the world, really. This really is very much what he's saying, Charlie McConalogue is saying.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Indeed, he spoke not that long ago before the European Parliament in the Agri Committee, and essentially he made exactly the same points. And I picked up in particular his closing remarks where he highlighted that the USDA and the European Commission have a shared vision of what we need to do on climate change mitigation. But yes, there are, let's say, different approaches on how we get to our goals and objectives. So in a sense, that's a positive thing also, because in a sense, it provides for a real life laboratory. And we'll be able to see who succeeds in a competitive environment, and we can learn from one another and through good exchange. And again, he highlighted the ongoing contacts between our respective organizations aimed at joint cooperation to essentially share good practices at the international level. Because frankly, this is a challenge and a task which confronts us all. And we really have to work in a very cooperative manner. And there we're exactly on the same wavelength, and you're entirely right. I can't imagine any Minister for Agriculture in any developed country or developing country for that matter that would differ fundamentally with what Secretary Vilsack had to say earlier.
He spoke specifically about revisiting biotechnology regulation and specifically gene editing. Now, whenever you mention that around Europe, politically it raises a red flag, but is it a nettle that the EU must maybe grasp sooner rather than later again?
Yes, but it shouldn't overshadow nonetheless Europe's outstanding record on research and innovation. I think there's too much focus on the things that divide us rather than the things that we share. And yes, over the past decade or so, Europe's approach towards biotech in particular has been questioned in the Agri-Food area. Nobody questions that, for example, in the pharmaceutical area where Europe has outstanding successes, including in relation to COVID vaccines. And yes, in Europe, we do recognize that basically we have to find a formula that allows us to seize on the huge potential offered by biotech, but we also have to do it in a manner which is acceptable to our citizens, because, like it or not, and we can't ignore this, a significant body of our civil society does have ongoing concerns that too much faith, too much investment is being put on biotech solutions to issues which require a more, in their view, holistic approach. So we need to revisit the entire legislative framework, because obviously we have to respect our legal obligations. They're important to the European Court of Justice judgments in this area, which, for example, have found that we need to evaluate new technologies within the framework of the existing approach towards GMOs. But the Commission is committed to, as I say, revisiting that framework to see how we can find a framework that allows us to ensure that innovation, including innovation in biotech, plays a key role in tackling the huge challenges that confront us.
Okay, challenge, innovation, solutions, they're words that are mentioned at every single agricultural conference that we go to now, and it all relates, of course, to finding ways to be more sustainable and to reduce emissions. And that's where I'm going to bring you in, Dr. Harry Clark, because you're involved in a very exciting project there, very topical area to be involved in, Greenhouse Gas Research Centre there in New Zealand, a country which a lot of people equate to Ireland for many reasons when it comes to agriculture. But the question we all want to know, farmers and consumers alike, is, are there actually proven technologies and methods to reduce cattle emissions to meet targets while not impinging on welfare and productivity and output of animals? Where are we exactly? There's a lot of talk about reducing methane emissions without it necessarily affecting production and yield. Where exactly are we with all of that?
I think we are in a very, very optimistic place. If you'd have asked me that question 15 years ago, I think there was a question mark as to whether you could reduce emissions while not affecting the other desirable attributes. You would not want to reduce emissions at the expense of animal welfare, at the expense of not producing as much product, either milk or meat. And I think we can now see that there are technologies emerging, and they're emerging very rapidly and will be on the market within a few years, that can make a substantial contribution, particularly to the reduction of methane. I don't know whether you've seen the press releases today that a Dutch company called DSM, who market a product called Bovaer, have just had it licensed for use in Chile and Brazil. And they've done close to 50 experiments throughout the world, and they are getting 30 to 50% reductions in enteric methane emissions without any drop in productivity. Now, the product is only one of a range of products, and the product is not suitable for all systems. But what it does give us the confidence in is that these products will work. They'll be coming onto the market, and I think we'll see a more diverse range of things coming on the market. But we've now got the confidence to see that these things will come onto the market and will make a difference. I think the challenge for New Zealand and Ireland is that we're very pastoral based, and quite a lot of the products really are far more suitable for intensively housed animals. But to me, that's a technological issue that will get solved. We can have slow release devices that will allow them at some point to be suitable for our systems. So I'm very optimistic. We can also point to things like breeding low emission animals using very standard technologies of conventional breeding. We now can show that, and New Zealand has them, we are now putting into practice, and farmers can actually choose rams that are proven to have lower emissions. And we are looking at cattle breeding programs as well. So I'm very optimistic that in further investment in technology and greater collaboration across countries like ourselves will put us in a very strong position to be able to make a contribution to reducing emissions globally. And so that's where agriculture will be able to make its contribution.
Yeah, but the big question is, that's all fine and well that this is happening, but should this not have been happening maybe a decade ago when the warning signs were actually there? Was agriculture far too dismissive at that stage, and now we're racing to catch up? I mean, will this technology be demonstrable by 2030, for example?
Oh, well, can I answer the first? I don't think science was backward. I have to, and maybe New Zealand is somewhat different to Europe, but we had considerable investment starting in the mid-2000s and early 2000s. And my own centre was set up by the government because it saw an urgent need that New Zealand had to tackle this problem. I think where some of the issues came was that the agricultural sector itself was not really prepared. It wasn't science that wasn't prepared. Science was ahead of sectoral opinion. And if I go back to New Zealand, development of New Zealand policy, in 2005, we in actual fact had a farmer revolt who, when it was talked about putting some sort of obligation on farmers around trying to mitigate emissions. We had tractors up the steps of Parliament, and we had a very popular government nearly brought down by protests of farmers saying, no, it's not to do with us. We don't believe in climate change. Leave us alone. If you traverse 15 years on, we are now have gone from a stage of farmers refuting climate change to accepting it, but saying it's too hard for us to do things, to probably 2015, 16 saying, yeah, we accept it and we need to do things. Can you help us do things? And now we've got the stage of farmers are saying, we're going to take it into our own hands. We're innovative. We see market opportunities and we're going to rise to the challenge. And I think now we're getting a kind of marriage of the science and the farmer will. And that's why I'm very optimistic that we can start making progress by 2030. And I think we will see products coming onto the market before 2030 that will allow agricultural sectors like ours and yours to meet those ambitious targets that are likely to be put on the sector. So I think it's not only what governments will be putting on the sector. If you look at agricultural supply chains, the major companies, for example, Nestle, Danone, are actually also going to put obligations on farmers to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So there's pressure in lots of ways from consumers, from companies, and from governments. And I'm very optimistic that we will do that.
Sorry for interrupting. I'll come to Michael again, but just on that, I mean, we had the groundswell protests in July there, which the way it was reported would suggest that there is a major division between farmers and environmentalists, and it's actually growing rather than coming more together. So doesn't that go back to my point that farmers are kind of saying, yeah, we accept we need to make changes, but just not now, or it'll take a few more years before you will actually see the results of it?
I think you have to be very careful of what you read in newspapers when headlines come up. I think it'd be silly to dismiss the fact that there weren't some sectors of the economy and of the agricultural sector that weren't resistant to this. But I think you're saying the vast majority of farmers are embracing the challenge. I'm not saying they are pleased to have the challenge, because it is a challenge and it will be difficult, but I think I wouldn't read too much into the groundswell. I think there is a rump of farmers who still feel that they're not going to have to do this. And it's not only about greenhouse gases. It's what the minister said earlier on. There's a whole raft of legislation coming down the road at them, and they just feel completely overwhelmed.
Okay, Michael Scannell, just on that issue of legislation and policy, farmers that I meet say we're doing everything to the letter of the law because we will be penalised, we'll be docked our payments if we do anything wrong in our farms, and yet they're being vilified. Would you accept that it's policy coming from places like Brussels and not farm practice that has agriculture where it is in Ireland very much in the firing line and with emissions growing?
Well, policy is drawn up in a democratic process. The minister himself acknowledged earlier that the CAP reform has now been essentially agreed at member state level. It still has to be formally adopted in the European Parliament, but it would follow a very thorough democratic process. Yes, I do understand that farmers, or certain farmers at least, do feel vilified and feel under pressure. And in some respects, I have sympathy for them. On two issues in particular, the extent to which society at large recognizes their efforts and essentially, frankly, let's say, walks the walk, because farmers are now expected to produce to higher standards, invest more. But what remains uncertain is the extent to which consumers, the food processing industry, etc., will pay more for the higher costs involved. And I think they also have legitimate concerns in relation to the extent to which our trade partners match the level of ambition in Europe. But that's something I touched on earlier, where I highlighted that this is essentially a zero-sum game if basically everybody doesn't show the same level of ambition. And that's why at the international context, at the forthcoming conference in Glasgow, that all members at the international level, everybody signs on. But I think nonetheless, there are huge opportunities here for farmers also. I'd add that markets currently are performing strongly, or doing well. The agricultural sector has proven extraordinarily resilient, especially in Europe, in the face of the COVID crisis, which I think is a fantastic testimony to the strength of our common agricultural policy and the fact that here in Europe, we are able to feed our population with high quality, safe, affordable food from essentially our own domestic supply. We enjoy a big trade surplus. And the policies going forward, yes, will require a greater effort on the part of farmers, but also involve adding an awful lot of value added to food. That essentially food now has to be seen very holistically, not just addressing people's nutritional requirements, but also fulfilling a whole range of societal expectations, notably on climate change, sustainability, but also issues on like animal welfare. So farmers can, could, and should expect to have that recognized, and it's the Commission's obligation to deliver that essentially ensures that their efforts are rewarded. So ultimately, I remain optimistic. And looking at Irish agriculture in particular, I was taken some time ago where I saw some figures on the value added in dairy gold butter and the huge premium it enjoys compared to other butters at both European and international level. And that reflects the fact that Ireland has a very good image and it has capitalized on this in this specific area. We're seeing a lot of the same in relation to beef and beef products. But for the agri-food sector in general in Ireland, which has performed very strongly in recent years, then as the Minister highlighted earlier, has even bigger ambitions to increase the level of value added in exports. Ireland can capitalise on the huge advantages that it has, including on sustainability, to basically increase revenues to farmers. So I remain positive, and I frankly think those who are critical or think that we've gone too far, too fast, aren't sufficiently looking at the opportunities that are there for us. And I'd highlight again, in terms of the CAP reform, the CAP has proven that it's proactive in basically seeing what needs to be done in relation to climate change. We're ahead of the curve compared to other sectors. And again, I think that's can be used to the advantage of the farming community to highlight that basically farmers are up to the challenge, but is the rest of society prepared to support them? But, I conclude, I'm positive.
Okay, well, you spoke there about accountability and how there's been a shift away from just safe and traceable food to more accountability in terms of animal welfare and in terms of protection of biodiversity and the environment and tackling climate change. And in that regard, we have the Green Deal, we have the farm to fork policy, and farmers and food producers feel that maybe, the power base has shifted away from where you are in DG Agri and more towards the Commissionership of Health, of Environment, and that Frans Timmermans is now probably the most influential man in Europe when it comes to the future of food production in Europe.
I think that's certainly true in terms of his role in directing and steering EU policy on the Green Deal. But we cannot lose oversight of the sustainability dimension. And as Secretary Vilsack acknowledged earlier, it has three dimensions: the economic, social, and the environmental. And the one huge advantage that the farming community enjoy is their produce is the foundation stone, it's the raw material for the entire agri-food industry. If you don't have the raw materials, you can't produce the food. And we can't have, frankly, a resilient society unless we have food security. So essentially, that's a non-negotiable. We've just come through a very difficult COVID crisis. It's not over yet, but hopefully it's going in the right direction. But I repeat what I said earlier, the agri-food sector proved extremely resilient in Europe, but that success shouldn't lead to complacency. We need to guarantee into the future that Europe has an extremely resilient agri-food system to keep our citizens fed. The subsidiary challenge, which is also huge, is to ensure that that's done in a sustainable manner. And this is critical also in the interest of our own farmers who face at first hand the risks of climate change. But, bottom line, farmers keep us fed. And that's a huge selling point.
They do, and I'll come back to you in a moment in New Zealand. But I just want to ask you one other question on that, Michael, in relation to farmers keeping people fed. but they can be from anywhere in the world. And the feeling that I hear some farmers expressing is that the farm to fork, lower input policy will result in the outsourcing of food supply to Europe. Is that a legitimate concern?
I think it's overdone. Europe is very mindful of the necessity to ensure that our level of ambition on climate change mitigation is not undermined by a lesser level of ambition on the part of others. You know, this is a global challenge. Everybody has to play their part. And there are a whole range of proposals in the Green Deal and Farm to Fork to ensure that precisely doesn't happen, that we don't outsource our food supply. And I think there's a misconception out there that it's somehow easy to export to Europe. And, you know, if you were to follow that logic, taking the example of Brexit, UK food exporters would be booming to Europe. They've left the EU. They're not subject to essentially the cap and its requirements, etc. But as you know, just pick up your newspapers, they're currently facing huge difficulties in exporting to us. That's not, that shouldn't be interpreted as meaning that our systems are protectionist, but it's simply we have extremely high standards and we defend them, and we will continue to do so. And if and when we see any risks to our, let's say, our own producers arising from a lack of a level playing field due to, let's say, a lack of commitment on the part of our trading partners to meeting the challenge of climate change mitigation and our unfair costs being imposed on our own producers, obviously we have to take account of that. But, you know, you look at the work program of the Commission under the Green Deal and Farm to Fork, there are a whole range of proposals on, for example, that ensuring that products on the EU market don't contribute to deforestation, which aim precisely at essentially ensuring that we're not undermined by, let's say, a lack of a level playing field on the level of ambition on environmental and climate change. And I'd add in that context also, in the recent CAP reform on the CMO proposal, the Common Market Organisation element of the overall deal, there was a commitment for the Commission to present a report to Member States and the Parliament in the first half of next year on essentially this issue of how to ensure that standards in the EU are not undermined by imports of products from third countries that don't comply to the same standards. And the French presidency has signalled that they want to give this issue a very high priority. It's what they call the so-called clause miroir. Okay. They don't want our producers undermined by lesser standards in third countries. Okay. But I might add in passing, I hope that will never be an issue with our colleagues in New Zealand, who I think have equally high ambitions on sustainability.
Yeah, and I'm going to go to Dr. Harry Clark on that whole area now, and it'll be interesting actually to see whether the Slovenian presidency can sign off on the CAP or whether it has kicked into next year and the beginning of the French presidency. Dr. Harry Clark, there is a lot of talk in Ireland and Europe about, you know, reducing production until we actually find demonstrable ways of reducing emissions. And that's a big debate here, you're probably aware of. What about New Zealand? Because it's a big dairy, obviously, producing nation, export nation, all of that. Is that something there that's been considered at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is one of the arguments that the ag sector puts forward is that, you know, New Zealand, in terms of emissions per unit of product, is internationally is low, very competitive with the best in the world. And if we didn't produce it, if we said to meet our own domestic targets, we reduced our production, but that demand was met from somewhere else with a lower, higher footprint, it's actually not doing the globe any good at all.
That argument is made here too, and people dismiss it as a cop-out. Just because your neighbour doesn't clean up after them doesn't mean that you shouldn't.
Exactly right. And I think that it's an argument that's probably somewhat overstated. And I don't think it can be used as an argument to not do something yourself. We've got it's a nice self-serving argument, and there is some substance to it, but we can't use it as an excuse not to do anything. And I think that most people recognize that. But I think the optimism for us is that we feel that we can reduce emissions without reducing the amount of food produced. And if we have a climate change commission, and I'm one of New Zealand's climate change commissioners, And our first report came out, which is a recommendation to the government, came out at the end of May. And we, in actual fact, have developed budgets that maintain the amount, we've modeled budgets that we see can maintain the amount of food produced and exported while reducing emissions. It does mean there may be some small reductions in livestock numbers, but individual productivity of animals goes up, and the whole efficiencies in production systems can see us producing very similar amounts of food, but reduced emissions. And we take great heart from our sheep sector, which in 1990 had somewhere in the region of 57 million ewes, breeding sheep. We now have about 23 million. And we produce the same amount of lamb, and we produce it with close to 40% less emissions.
You are an author of the IP on the international panel of for climate change. Is the way we measure methane, is that going to be recalibrated into the future?
I think the way we measure methane is perhaps not the right way to put it. It's the way we equate methane to other gases. And we use these things called equivalence metrics. And one of them is global warming potential. And it's the most common one. It's the one used in international reporting. And there's been a bit of a debate that does this metric really reflect the role of a gas like methane? And there's undoubtedly it doesn't. And so, but that, when you look at what the IPCC does, it's always looked at what reductions are required to meet a given temperature goal. And it actually works in individual gases rather than saying we need a reduction that's on a basket of gases. And if you look at the 1.5 degree report, it came up with, we know that carbon dioxide emissions have to go to net zero and probably below net zero in the longer term. And the emissions of the other gases don't have to go to net zero, but they do have to be reduced. And so the IPCC message in many ways was get carbon dioxide down to net zero and make reductions in other gases, because you can't ignore the other gases when you're looking to stay below a temperature limit. But nowhere in the IPCC has it ever said you need to get something like methane down to zero. And the latest figures out of the IPCC were, and they're always arranged because the different scenarios will give you different numbers, were that by around 250, we need to be looking at emission reductions for methane in the range of 24 to 47%. So I think the real issue is when countries are setting targets, is how they account for the fact that the gases are different. In New Zealand, what we've done, we've set a separate target for methane. And we then have set another target for the long-lived gases, where we do know that they have to go down to net zero. So we've attacked it like that. And I think the real issue is, how do you set your target and still account for a gas like methane, and particularly how it affects the agricultural sector? Because if you say it has exactly the same target as carbon dioxide, I think there is a valid argument that you're unfairly targeting a sector like agriculture that does produce methane.
Okay, time is against us, but I'm going to put one more question to both of you. Michael, I'll go to you first. Get your crystal ball out there now, because I want you both, based on your knowledge of where we may be going and obviously projecting into the future. Michael, where do you see EU livestock production or agriculture in general, including tillage production, renewable energy use, increased horticulture production and all of that by maybe 2030, or let's go a bit further out to 2050, which is a target that is out there. What will the face of EU agriculture look like? Will it be much the same as now, or will there be shifting sands?
Oh, I think there have to be shifting sands. Frankly, if we arrive at a situation in 2030 where it's business as usual, the CAP reform will be seen to have failed in its fundamental objective in steering our production in a new direction. So essentially, we do have to be ambitious, and that's why the reform includes all the issues of which you're well aware, including the eco schemes, the much greater emphasis on advisory service, research and development, etc., etc. So it's all a question about, in particular, seizing on the opportunities of research and innovation, essentially the topic of this conference, to allow us to produce the same or more, but in a much more economical, resource-efficient manner, particularly in terms of emissions. So it's not new, it's not particularly original. We basically have to become much more innovative. But I remain optimistic. You know, there are huge areas where we can make big savings, for example, on the issue of food waste, better breeding techniques, feed additives, ages of animals at slaughter, precision farming, agroecology, etc., etc. But we better act fast and decisively to deliver on that potential.
Okay, and Dr. Harry Clarke, briefly to yourself, do you have a picture of global agriculture by 2050?
I don't think I'd be that ambitious. I think I'd certainly have a picture of where I thought a country like New Zealand would be. And what I've seen in the last 30 years, a transformation in New Zealand agriculture that went from sheep-dominated agriculture, something that became more dairy-dominated, and now we're seeing the rise of horticulture, which is suddenly going to be bigger than the sheep sector within the next 5 years. And I think we'll see those massive shifts. I think that there'll be a lot of technological innovation, that we'll see forestry be different to how it is now. I'm not sure that we'll see the livestock sector playing the same role, but I think we'll see the land sector playing an important role in the economy. But it may be we produce different things, and we'll certainly be still on the line of high value products with environmental integrity and being sold to very discerning consumers. It may not be what we have now. And I think the role of science and technology will be to help those emerging industries get a place in the market and help the current industries to improve their efficiency and to still thrive in an environment where there are severe challenges, and that sort of, the environmental, social and economic. And I think the societal approach in New Zealand, that we perhaps pushed the economic too far in the past, and we need to bring in the societal, the environmental and the social. And a unique feature for New Zealand is the cultural one, because of our Indigenous peoples as well.
Okay, very interesting take, and I want to thank both of you for your time this morning. Pity you can't be here, but then I'm looking at you, Dr. Harry Clarke, and I'm looking at the background there and saying, pity we can't be there. You're coming into your summertime there, so I'll let you maybe back outside. Let's pretend that that's a window in your house that you're sitting in front of there. But thank you so much for joining us all the way from New Zealand. And Michael Scannell, thank you indeed for joining us from Brussels as well. Okay, at the start of all of that, we did pose a question to you online. Can Irish agriculture continue to meet the growing global demands while complying with climate change ambition? And I think we may have a result. Yes, say 75%. No, say 25%. So that's a very interesting figure there. So thank you very much for getting involved in that. Now we're moving on. And last year, in partnership with FBD, ASA, they launched an annual fellowship program which aims to contribute positively to scientific innovation within the Irish agri-food industry while developing Ireland's next agri-industry thought leader. Well, the new exciting initiative for ASA members, it includes a €10,000 fellowship to assist the successful candidate in further developing their scientific knowledge and expertise while enhancing their communication skills and the sharing of scientific information in an engaging and accessible manner to the public. I'm delighted to reveal today that the inaugural recipient of the fellowship is Professor Lawrence Shalhoub. Lawrence is a native of County Clare. A lot of you will know Lawrence. He's a Senior Principal Research Officer with Teagasc in Moore Park, and his fellowship topic will focus on strategies to achieve climate neutrality in agriculture and the land use sector.
FBD Insurance has grown hand in hand with Irish farming and Irish agriculture over the past 50 years. throughout that period, we have always supported the industry, and in turn, the industry has supported our insurance business. So today we're reciprocating an investment back to advance knowledge, science, and innovation to meet the challenges that the industry and indeed society are facing at this moment. And I'm delighted to be part of this inaugural award being developed by the Agricultural Science Association to advance that and to acknowledge the value of research and the contribution that the agricultural science fraternity have contributed over the years, and particularly in the person of Lawrence Chalou, the inaugural winner and the inaugural fellow, and to wish this fellowship well in the future. And I look forward to continuing FBD's support, and for our part, we're very pleased again to be part of this programme.
On behalf of ASA, I'm delighted to announce the inaugural ASA FBD Fellow for 2021. Sincere thanks to FBD Trust for their valued support in this exciting initiative for ASA members. I wish to congratulate Professor Lawrence Chalou on his appointment as the inaugural FBD ASA Fellow and wish him the very best with his study proposal. At a time of great challenge and uncertainty in the sector, we look forward to his recommendations and pathways for climate neutrality and wish him the very best in doing so.
Just like to start by thanking the ASA and the FBD Trust for allowing me or presenting me with the honour of being their inaugural fellow. The title of this project or report will be Strategies for Irish Agriculture to Become Climate Neutral. And I suppose this is really important given where we are with the low carbon climate action, low carbon bill, and as well as the recent IPCC report, which really stresses the need for society as a whole to reduce greenhouse gases. So the focus of this report will be to identify strategies on how agriculture can become climate neutral by 2040. While the target of the climate action bill is 2050, it's good for agriculture to have ambition to become climate neutral before that. I suppose the report will include different metrics, different methodologies, and different assumptions around how land is used, assumptions around mitigation strategies, and assumptions around activity levels for livestock production systems. So the report will be presented in 2022 at the ASA Conference.
On Clárabú, well done there to Lawrence Chalou in Chagascoon Moore Park on that fellowship, and well done to ASA indeed for organising that. Okay, we're going to move on now to our second panel of the morning, and we're going to focus now on entrepreneurship in Irish food production. And to take us through the next panel, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, former ASA President and Editor of Irish Country Living, Amy McKeever.
Thanks very much, Damien. I think we're going to have another poll before we commence with the second session on entrepreneurial innovation. Do you want to put the poll up? So what will most influence the diet of the 2030 consumer? I think that's a very important question for anybody out there that is watching to answer. So I suppose to start, we're often challenged as ASA members, as ASA council members, as to what we are doing in running these events. That we're talking about policy, we're talking about solutions, we're talking about science, but what practical solutions are we actually presenting? And I think that I want to congratulate Lawrence on that achievement, and I really look forward to reading what he will return to us as members and as the industry. And I think that that's a very good way that the ASA is delivering, because there are many challenges. As Anne-Marie pointed out in her address, we believe that science will provide solutions. And I'm delighted to be joined here on my panel by three entrepreneurial innovators who are actually practitioners. So we will be able to discuss here today actual solutions that they are providing to some of the challenges that are facing our food industry and what that food industry will look like in 2030. So I have here on my left Matt Foley from Kilbush Nurseries, Ger Cleary from Glenisk, and Nick Cotter of Cotter Agri-Tech. Now, before I move to the questions, we do have a short video montage just to explain a little bit about what our three speakers do in their own businesses so that we can to frame the innovations that they have put in place. So if you can play that, please.
My name is Matt Foley, and myself and my brother John, we run Kilbush Nurseries here in Rush in North Dublin, where we grow the finest tomatoes in Ireland. My father set the business up in about 1936. He built his first glasshouse, the first commercial glasshouse in Ireland. To turn a profit and to survive and to have enough money to reinvest is a huge, huge accomplishment. My father instilled in us that if a job was worth doing, it was worth doing well.
We invented the Cotter crate about 5 years ago, and we did this because we found it incredibly difficult to administer vaccines and doses to lambs when they're young. We were doing it the traditional method, but the problems with this is that there's a very high labour requirement to do 2 or 3 things at one time to them. Lambs are jumping on top of each other, you miss doses, and it's just incredibly difficult because you're bent over all day, and it's not particularly good for the back.
The Cotter crate works where the lamb is brought onto the crate by the operator, and the operator will push the movable side towards the animal. The floor will then drop, holding the animal then under their own weight between the V-shaped walls. It allows the operator to administer all necessary treatments, and then when the operator is finished, he's able to release the animal down through the crate.
Glenisk is over 25 years in business. Within that time, we have grown from 1 person to now where we have over 60 people employed in our business. We work with 50 farmers right around the country to make 100 million servings of yogurt each year. It's all about the taste. If it doesn't taste good, well then we won't make it. Our dad wanted to bring the best of what nature provides to families right around the country, and we're proud to continue that tradition.
Henry Ford said, if I had asked the public what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. Innovation is a broad concept, can be approached in many different ways, and I think our panel is going to demonstrate the different ways that they are approaching it. Adopting new innovations, learning how to use them, these are all important in terms of keeping a business developing. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary refers to innovation as being the introduction of something new. So Nick, I'm going to actually go to you first, because since this video was made, I think that you have added more innovation to the piece of kit, the piece of tech that you invented that won an RDS award for you and your brother. But what have you added to that since?
Yeah, so as the video shows, the solution first and foremost solves an animal handling issue. So, you know, in sheep farming, we see the majority of sheep farmers handle lambs between their legs or up in their arms, which is labour-intensive, time-consuming and costly. And our solution, the Cotter crate, bring the lamb to operator height, and then the farmer can do the job that they need to do quickly, easily and safely. So we're reducing labour costs and stress by facilitating easy vaccination and dosing. Handling is twice as fast, and the solution's preventing back injury, which is quite significant, as about half of our Irish sheep farmers suffer from lower back pain. Today, really, we're announcing the second innovation, and really the more exciting one, which is how we're addressing anthelmintic resistance. So anthelmintics are this range of drugs we use to control parasites, internal parasites in ruminants. And over the last number of decades, overuse, misuse, and ineffective control strategies has led to widespread resistance. And it's costing about $1 billion annually, and it's really going to threaten that goal of producing 45% more food to feed 10 billion people by 2050 if unsolved. The science tells us that 80% of these parasites live in only 20% of the animals, highlighting that blanket treating flocks is unnecessary and harmful. And what we're providing, our innovation, is allowing farmers to move from blanket treating their flock to only dosing the ones that are performing poorly and actually need treatment. So how we do this is we have a mobile app called SmartWeight, and this integrates with the hardware. And what this app does is it records the animal's EID tag for individual identification and also weight data. And then we then use this information to feed the happy factor algorithm. This is a comprehensive algorithm that considers a range of variables to determine which animals would benefit from an anthelmintic treatment or not. And then the farmer doses based on this information in real time. So it's green for don't dose and red for please dose. And it works. 19 commercial farms across Ireland and the UK and 2 research institutes, UCD and Queen's, have been using it this year. And at some of the farms, we've set up 2 experimental treatment groups, one being dosed using the industry gold standard fecal egg count approach, and the other being dosed with the happy factor. And generally, our results have shown a 40% reduction in anthelmintic use without any compromise to animal welfare and performance. So by not dosing everything, this is maintaining refugia, and it is going to slow the development of resistance. And by maintaining refugia, I mean that we maintain a higher proportion of worms that can be killed by the wormer versus worms that can't. And the research shows this. Over 5 years, the happy factor approach only led to a small reduction in efficacy of the drug, whereas in a group treated monthly, we saw a 35% reduction in anthelmintic efficacy. And when efficacy drops to this level, you're talking 10 to 25% of a performance hit. So in sum, the solution is going to reduce labor costs. It's going to allow farmers to do more in the same amount of time. So perhaps they might be able to begin vaccinating, which is something they might have been doing before. And this is really a huge benefit because vaccination is one of the main ways of reducing antimicrobial resistance. We'll reduce wormer use and hence wormer cost, and we'll be able to maintain and safeguard the efficacy of these really important drugs.
So this is in trials at the moment, but you are hoping to roll this out as a product.
Yeah, we're just doing some validation, and that's what we've done and invested in all this year, and the aim is to launch the product early next year ahead of the next lambing season.
So I suppose, you know, to me, you're a startup at the moment, and I'm going to move down to Ger. I suppose we have 3, I suppose, different phases of development of the companies represented here, but you're an established company, and you've been innovating. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know what I mean, kind of the challenges? Let's say Nick's after talking there about the challenge. It's an animal health challenge. What challenge are ye addressing in terms of sustainable food production into the future?
Yeah, well, I suppose in business you're faced with challenges all the time. Really, you try to be keep abreast with everything out there and work with what you have and make the most of it. I suppose over 30 years in business, when we're talking about innovation, we look at every aspect of our businesses and all the challenges in each particular aspect of our business, and seeing can we get better bang for our euro in each department that we run in Glenis. So for example, innovation in marketing, we look to see what can we do uniquely, can we do differently than what other competitors are doing, so that we can get a consumer to taste our product for the first time, or to remind our customer that why they should keep on continuing buying Glenis on a day-to-day basis as well. We look at the process that we work. We try to do things in a better, cleaner, financially astute way for both stakeholders and shareholders alike. So we have implemented the various scientific ways of producing product through energy refinement of solar panels, wind energy, and heat recovery systems as well. So we try to adapt them to our manufacturing plant and move with the times as well.
Give us an example of like one of the tangible innovations that you're currently, you know, working on that's going to add value. And I know you spoke there, it's about your company and your shareholders. In terms of the wider industry, how are these, you know what I mean, what's the leading innovation that Glenis are championing?
Yeah, well, it's mainly, I suppose, I mentioned shareholders, I mentioned stakeholders as well. Our stakeholders are our customers as well. And one simple example as well, we've been producing milk cartons, packaged organic milk and goat's milk for the last 25 years as well. We moved with the times as we taught, doing a better product over the years, and our packaging consisted of your paper-based carton with a screw-on plastic top. Now, when I was younger, we used to buy our milk carton just where you opened it up really and poured out the milk as well. And we just sort of said to ourselves, we're producing a pack, we're trying to have organic credentials, do our best, but we're still producing a pack that has 2 different types of material on it and can't be recycled because one is basically glued onto the other. So we took what we thought was the bold step at the time of removing the screw-on cap and just saying to our customers, said, listen, we're still producing the top quality product as well, but we have to work with environmental thinking and concerns as well. So it was actually surprising when we took off the screw-off top. We found that people under 20, 25 years of age
looked at it and hardly even knew how to open up the milk carton, where you had to just pull the gable top flaps and open up. But the irony of it, after launching, it was endorsed by various people around the country as well, and we actually saw our sales grow from that as well. So it was a simple little thing that we said we needed to sort of go back and learn and practice some of the processes that were in place before, which we've lost really as well, and bring it back and just reintroduce it to the marketplace as well, and that's worked for us.
So like this is a new product development that's an old product development. Would you feel that like convenience has actually, you know, the need for convenience was the innovations of the past? Is it that in terms of packaging food products like that, we're trying to get away from single-use plastics, we're trying to get away from all of those in terms of waste packaging? You know, do you see the consumer actually adopting this? Like we're talking about, you know, will the consumer pay more for food? Will they actually adopt, you know, kind of bring in their own packaging to, you're not going to be able to put yogurt into it, but...
Yeah, well, if we're going to be serious with climate change, whatever, the simple answer to that is they have to be, whatever. If we go with the laissez-faire, sure, it's not my problem, it's someone else's problem, well, things are going to get worse as well. And there's going to be a little bit of hassle and upheaval in everyone's part of life, from the retailers to the manufacturers, to the farmers, to the customer, if we want to slow down, stop, and reverse climate change as well. So, yeah, we're in a convenient mode as we are. Like we know in our supermarkets we can get product from every part of the world delivered the next day, and the logistics way of us transporting the product from our manufacturing warehouse to the supermarket as well, it has to be at most at ease for the supermarket handlers to put them on the shelf for the customer to buy. So those things need to be changed as well if we're going to look at our environmental credentials in a more serious way. So yes, there is going to be upheaval, but it's probably, we have to learn from the past as well. We know back 25, 30 years, we all reuse stuff. We left our milk bottles out for the milkman, and he was collected it the next day as well. We had money back bottles on our Lucozade or whatever bottles, and we all bought into that, and that's what we were used to, but we lost that particular way of thinking as well. So we did it before, so we should be able to do it again.
Yeah, and I'm going to move on to Matt from Killbush Nursery. Matt, if anybody thinks he might look familiar, I think he's been emblazoned across the country on billboards with a recent campaign of late. But we've gone from an input, which is, you know what I mean, your animal health treatments, to the consumer and how the consumer accesses their food. I want to go back to the inputs that you're using in your production system, and how, you know what I mean, they're talking about it on the radio this morning, the price of fuel, the price of energy. This is going to play a huge role into the environmental challenges we're coming up against. What are you doing to address that challenge?
What we did is, 6 years ago, well, I'll go back, and that our company has evolved over the years. You talk about innovation, and innovation to me means actually being able to survive in business and the actions you take to stay in business. And if you look at energy, we were at one stage burning heavy fuel oil, and then we were burning light fuel oil, and then we were using diesel, and then we were using natural gas. Or actually, we went to coal then after that, and then we went to natural gas. So it's a lifetime of, and at the moment we're in a combined heat and power plant, which is probably, it's certainly the most efficient way of generating electricity if you can use all the inputs. And what we do on the site is we take the natural gas and we generate electricity. And in order to cool the engine, we use all that hot water that's cooling the engine, and we use that to heat our tomatoes. And at the same time as doing that, we take all the heat that goes up the chimney, which is either CO2 or water, and we extract all the heat out of that. It comes off at about somewhere around 500 degrees, and we bring it down to about 60 degrees, take all the heat back, and then we pump the CO2 into the greenhouses, and that enhances our production, and that gives us somewhere around 15% extra output on our production. So it's been life has been a journey, and we'll probably move on. Well, mightn't be me, but possibly my brother or other members, and we'll look at the new technologies that move into heat pumps, and and it's always it's an evolution all along the way. There's no solution to it, and we keep changing.
And I suppose that's like kind of where I'd like to go as well with all three of you. How do you translate, do you know what I mean? How do you translate that innovation into an efficiency in your business like you've done?
Well, I think from our perspective, like we looked at it, I mean, we did feasibility studies on feasibility studies to be very sure about everything, that we had everything correct, because there was a lot of money involved in it. It was about €1.5 million project for us. We made sure that at the start that we measured everything, as in we have an engine, we measured the output of electricity, we measured the heat from that we're extracting from it, we measured the electricity that we're using on site from it, and we also measure the parasitic load, as the energy that it uses to run itself. And because we're able to measure all that energy, we actually get a result. We actually know how much we're saving, how much CO2 we're not putting into the environment, how much reduction in primary energy we're using, which is about 29%. We're saving about 1,200 tons of CO2. At the same time, because we're able to, we have all these measurements, we're able to calculate what our efficiency is. Now, under EU regulations, if we're over 75% efficient, we qualify for an exemption on the carbon tax.
Yep.
And our engine always runs over 80%, and at times it will run up into the low 90% efficiency. So that gives an exemption on carbon tax, which is a huge amount of money for us.
Yeah.
And having said that, when we did the original feasibility study, it was considered as part of the feasibility study as income that we had to attain when we carried it out. And that was a lesson, for anyone that's doing any kind of a project, that you must be able to measure everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear about, you have the ideals, but on the practical level, unless you can count it, it doesn't matter. You can, and that's
you can't manage what you can't.
Well, you can. What do you say about walking the walk? And you have to have the figures at the end of the day, and that's very important to us. And that's how it works.
And Nick, I suppose I'm going to go back to you then on that note in terms of efficiency. This is what you're trying to build into sheep production as well. It's a level of efficiency, lowering the amount of drenches and doses that you need to use. Just explain, I suppose, a little bit about this, the happy factor, this algorithm that's been developed, and how it actually works. Like, farmers are time poor. Is this going to add extra time to work, or is it going to reduce it?
No, I mean, it integrates with what farmers are already doing, which is regular handling every 4 or 5 weeks. How the algorithm works is a lot of it is done through the cloud and in the background. So we're feeding in the animal's weight data.
From the tech, from the piece of kit?
Yeah, so that's driven from the piece of kit. What we do in the background is we're bringing in local weather data, we're bringing in pasture availability and pasture quality, we bring in some bit of genetics too. And all this results in basically correctly identifying, is it worms that are affecting them, or is the farmer restricting pasture quality or availability? And from the research this year, I've driven over 30,000 kilometers and put through about 45,000 lambs through the prototype since April. And look, yeah, it's expensive, it's hard work, but it's what it takes to translate this idea into innovation, doing the hard slog, building the science, because that's what creates the confidence to go forward and move with the science. And it's what we've talked about, it's what we've done with all of our businesses. We had a firewood business that's still going now, and myself and my brother Jack set that up when we were kids, and we direct sell the lamb off the farm. And going slow to go fast later has been the motto, because if you don't get the basics right, and once you scale up, you're going to run into problems that you can't solve, and you're going to make mistakes. But it's all about user-centric innovation. That's been key for us with the agri-tech business. Because at the end of the day, when you get this feedback, it leads to a better product at the end. And a complaint at this early stage is a gift, really. But from what I can see, not enough businesses actually go out and do this. Like, they will create a product, and they go out there, and it doesn't align with what the customer wants. It's either a half-baked cake, or else it's not even a cake. It's a tart or a trifle or something else the customer doesn't want.
Yeah. Speaking of cake, we'll move down to Ger, and you've been innovating for 30 years. I think there was cheesecake there at one point in time in the business, melting in the back of the car. Can you, you went down the route of organic a long time ago, which mightn't be as efficient as other processes, but you decided to invest in that niche. Can you explain to us how, you know what I mean, kind of efficiency is built into your business, and how do you get people to pay for that innovation as you've moved forward through your business?
Yeah, well, as anyone can tell you, any player in producing food, it's a small margin, whatever. So you have to make sure that everything stacks up so you're sustainable for the future as well. Yeah, that mantra was always instilled in us of producing a healthy product with no additives and preservatives. It's how Glennisk was founded, as I said, back 30 years ago. So it was a natural step for us to go into organics, because that was how we perceived that the market was going to move, by looking at on a global scale, especially in Europe as well. So that was that contributed to part of our growth, and it's something that probably wasn't fashionable at the time, but companies like ourselves, we made it fashionable, because we found out that we sort of brought our products to the market maybe before the consumer knew that they wanted the product as well, and timing was worked for us as well, and we grew the organic name over the last 20 years because of that. We continue to improve now and innovate by, I suppose we look at innovation now in two types. One would be new product development, which we produce products from scratch. We don't actually really know. We do all the research, feasibility studies, etc. on it, and to get a product of what we think the consumer wants as well. But you don't really actually know, we find it, until you bring it to the supermarket shelf and until the consumer buys it. Will they buy it once, or will there be repeat purchases as well? So we try to back that up by ticking all the boxes, producing a product that is functional, that tastes properly, and is in a price level for the consumer as well. And we back that up by a marketing campaign to tell the consumer, to reiterate to the consumer of what Glennisk is about and why they need this product as well. So that model has sort of worked for us in the past. The other element of product innovation that we would look at is we have, I think, about 108 different types of products out there. Everything from our bread winner, which is a plain, natural 500 gram, all the way down in size to our baby yogurts as well. So those products, if you put one up beside each other and compare to what it was 10 or 12 years ago, you can see that it's totally changed in terms of functionality, packaging as well, but it still has the same Glennisk quality in it as well. So we innovate with our existing lines, and we also innovate with new product development as well.
You mentioned there, you know, it was companies like yours that made organic fashionable. The Green Deal is attempting to make organic fashionable now throughout Europe. How do you think that will impact on your USP, you know what I mean, in terms of product sales and being able to continue to have, like Michael Scannell said it, we haven't identified if people are willing to pay for added value on food. Are they willing to pay for sheep that have only had, you know, one drench as necessary? Are they willing to pay for tomatoes that are grown in a system that is very, very efficient? We haven't identified that yet. How do you see, like, do you have to innovate again now? Do you know what I mean? What is the next thing that Glennisk can do?
Well, I suppose looking at a bigger picture thing, we don't want to be just the only producers of organic or one of the few organic. We would prefer to see it become more mainstream as well. And we think Ireland is in a great position of that with its green credentials to be able to exploit that as well and grow with the market as well. As I said earlier on, if we need to look at environmental change, reducing carbon footprint, we need to look at all aspects of it. And we believe organic is a way of life that was practiced in the past, back 50, 70 years ago, but it was one of these many things that we lost as we moved into the second half of the 20th century as well. So we have all ideas that are in front of us. They don't need to be new ideas. They can be things that we learned from the past. And organic is one thing that we can learn from, that we did in the past as well. And it can be brought forward in a more modern way, that it can feed the larger population that we are living with now as well. And it can work on that particular level as well.
Yeah. Nick, I'm going to come back to you again then in terms of you know, the consumer demand for this innovation. How did you measure that? How do you know people are going to be willing to pay for this? Like when we spoke earlier, you spoke about the 2 other businesses that you run, but you said that they weren't scalable. And this is something that we often have to talk about in business, the fact that something is scalable. And you see this being a scalable business. How do you know that? How have you measured that?
Well, I suppose it's down to engagement with our test farmers, and it's down to seeing what value is being delivered for them. For example, one of our test farmers is Brian Nicholson, a very well-known Irish sheep farmer, and at his place, sure, it's only over 1 year, but in the trial group of 316 lambs, 30% have gone since May without any treatment, and they've reached target weight. And an additional 30% have reached target weight with just a single treatment. So these are the sheep that we're identifying that are either more resistant to worms, so they just don't carry worms, or else they're more resilient, so they can carry worms but actually not be affected by it. And the system is identifying these animals, and either way, these are sheep that can survive for a prolonged period without treatment. So we should really be breeding these into the future. Conversely, there was 4% within that group that needed treatment at every single handling. And maybe we need to take a closer look at these, ask why, and perhaps cull out a flocks. Like Brian said, that 4% are probably nature's rejects. So the value is being delivered because long term, this solution is going to improve sheep genetics worldwide. And really, that's why we want to start off in Ireland and the UK with the market we know. We've done enough between going to ploughing 2 years ago, seeing that our test farmers wanted it. I mean, out of those 19 test farmers, I think about 17 or 8 of them have committed to already purchasing the system for the season next year. So it's very exciting. Please God, it all comes good, but things are looking good so far.
It's great to see such a young man as well, kind of, I suppose, driving forward with innovative practices and not afraid to bring something to the market. But Matt, I want to talk to you about, like, we'll go back down through the panel as well, in fostering innovation in a company. Do you know what I mean? Fostering it within the staff. If it's a family business, do you know what I mean? There is a tendency to, you know, this is the way it's always been. It always worked fine. How do you keep innovating? How do you keep moving? Or is it a case of we have no choice, we have to?
Well, first of all, you must consider that innovation is doing the necessary things to stay in business. And we always keep our eye on the ball. We always see what's going on in other countries as regards, I mean, our primary target is the production of the tomatoes. They get to produce the good quality, the best tasting flavor. We never compromise on that with our inputs. Ever since I was in my 20s, we've been going abroad to the other countries. We go to Holland, England. I get so much mail. I read everything on the internet. And that filters down with my brother who's in business with me, and then it filters down with the staff. And we try to engage with our staff
so it's an entrepreneurial culture.
It's an entrepreneurial thing. People are offered opportunities to do courses and to upskill, and that's all part of it. And you have to do those things if you want to, even if you want to just retain staff nowadays, which is it's a huge issue. But on a broader picture, if you look at horticulture in general, like I think horticulture is probably creeping up to about 500 million output.
In Ireland?
In Ireland, yeah. And we saw there, I think it's it's after, I think it's beef, milk, pigs, and I think we're nearly as big as tillage and
boys will go mad.
Put together, you know, but we're kind of a Cinderella.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need, I mean, if you just look at, we don't receive any subsidies whatsoever. You know, you're on your own, you live and survive by your profit margin. There's very little as regard Teagasc. While the people that we work with in Teagasc are extremely committed and professional and are very helpful, the level of support isn't good enough. And like all what we have learned over possibly the last, particularly in the last 20 years, because we're a small company relative to our competitors abroad, particularly in Holland, we have outsourced. And that's part of our innovation. We outsource everything we can, as in, because, and I think it's a big problem with companies particularly in horticulture in Ireland, we're too small. There's very little scope for middle management. You know, there's the manager or the owner, or there's a couple of people, and then we drop down to supervisory level very quickly. And what we do, and the way we have adopted to do that is that our HR is outsourced, our payroll is outsourced, our advisors, our advisor, we usually bring people in to advise us from other countries, from either Holland or England. And so we people from work at the coalface. And that's been a very, very major part of our company to keep us, to innovate, to actually keep us up at the level that we need to operate at, or we'll fall.
And I think that was where I was coming to, I suppose, with my next question. And Karina has the new boss of Teagasc, and we have a very senior officials from the Department of Agriculture here for the next panel. What are the blockers for innovation in agriculture? What is it that government or research could do in your business? And we're putting the same question to you too.
The big thing is availability of capital. There are a number of projects taking place at the moment, and we received help from the Department of Agriculture by means of a grant. Now that grant is, I think it comes in at 40%, but in reality, if you can draw down 20%, you're doing very well. And the grant is spread upon the ground, and big projects they get a higher amount in total, the percentage tends to be less for that. And if you think about the amount of money that's probably invested in general agriculture as compared to horticulture, which, I mean, I heard, I think it was Minister Hackett say there recently about they're looking at horticulture as being one of the growth areas in the economy going forward. I mean, if you believe everyone, we're going to be eating far more vegetables and going forward, because of the healthier benefits of that. But if you actually talk to farmers on the ground, all they're saying is that they're not going to be able to be sustainable going forward.
Is that a labour issue as well, Matt?
Labour is part of it.
Yeah.
Labour at the moment, I think all across the economy is a massive issue. Not just
it is.
But it's for us this year was a bit of we got through it. But the practice, like we survived this year we hired more students this year. But students are only available when the colleges are closed. Yeah. And for us, we would not like to continue in business relying on students for our staff. And
I suppose, like when you have a company that doesn't have to pay carbon tax because of the level of efficiency that they're operating at, it seems a shame that we're not providing more support. Nick, for you, for what I mean, you're after winning a couple of awards and bits and pieces like that. You've had some support. What are the blockers for that scaling, for that next phase that you see?
Yeah, overall, on the bigger picture, we need more science and research. Anyone in doubt of this should look at UCD's multi-species swards research, which has allowed farmers to plant these mixes, and more research is urgently needed on persistency and on management to transform from monoculture ryegrass swards to these rich, diverse swards. And so we need to empower farmers with the science to then drive forward that change and adoption of these innovations. And I suppose the second blocker is adoption. So I'd like to see more funding at the end user level, like specific grants for precision livestock farming tools, which also will drive adoption. I guess for us, as you mentioned, the biggest support really has been from the research institutes and the test farmers, such as Tommy Boland and UCD, Queen's in Belfast. And our test farmers in particular, I've been amazed by how being given the tools and being empowered to change, how they've greatly embraced this better way of doing things. And it's not surprising really, because farmers want to do things the better way. They want to become more productive. They want to produce this high quality protein more sustainably. And quoting our keynote speaker, Secretary Vilsack, from a couple of years ago, they ought to be celebrated for this. So we need to stop pointing fingers. We need to get on with empowering farmers and with the necessary supports really to drive industry change.
Brilliant, thank you. Ger?
Yeah, I suppose there's blockers in every walk of life really as well, and we have seen them over the years as well, and we've learned to sort of navigate and circumvent them as well. What we find is we utilise our resources that maybe aren't really apparent in front of us, and we make the most of them. Like we have a staff, 80 employed in Glenisc. We serve 1.6 million servings of yogurt on a weekly basis, and we have suppliers of product that are situated all around Europe and the world as well. So we tap into all of those resources. If we find that we're blocked in one particular area, well then we'll go and we'll ask or suppliers, have you come across this particular problem as well, and how did you circumnavigate it as well? They have a wealth of information in their own particular areas as well that we learn from there as well. So we're not going to come up with all the answers ourselves. We feed it out to the mass of information that's out there that we've built up from, as I said, from our customers, from our suppliers as well. We get feedback from our customers as well. We just know by trends of how things are going as well. We have constantly have forums with them as well. So we learn from these things as well. And they nearly answer our questions if we find that there's some block or cul-de-sac that we're faced with.
We're running out of time. I'm going to just come back, just one more question in one sentence. In terms of the future direction and the future challenges of Irish agriculture, what is the innovation in your business that's going to be the most important?
Well, I suppose we keep going what we do. We produce product in a clean, environmentally friendly, as pure as we possibly could. And I think if you keep with those particular simple attributes within your product as well, well then you can look forward to a fulfilling future.
Nick?
Yeah, it's really to continue what we're doing, but I think on a broader scale, we don't really know how to do food. We have, the Cambridge climate change study from years ago suggesting intensification in some areas and less so in others. You have the organic movement, and we have a middle ground at the moment. And I think it's good. You have vegans and vegetarians, you have insects, you have vertical farming, the whole lot. But I think what we need to not forget about is that we need food to live. So vilifying agriculture and its emissions and putting it in the same area as comparison as some of the other non-essential activities isn't really a fair comparison. Now, there is a list of things we need to do and a list of things we shouldn't. So, and by and large,
that's
it really
a long
means
sentence.
Doing more with less and doing more with less and being kinder to the environment. And that's what it is going to the future.
And Matt, to finish us.
Well, I don't have the lot of numbers, but I do know that what we will do is we will always continue to keep our eye on the ball to see what's happening with the new technology. And we will move forward, and we move forward pretty quickly into new energy technologies like we always have in the past. And we'll also watch what's happening in labour, in product development. And we'll always strive to produce the best tasting tomatoes that's possible.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's no doubt about that. I'm just going to sum up. Keep innovating, doing the necessary things to stay in business, measure, 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 availability of capital, more research, empower farmers and celebrate them. I want to thank my panel very much, and we're going to go to the results of our poll. What will most influence the diet of the 2030 consumer? Country of origin, 8%. Cost, 34%. Health factors, 47%. And cultural trends, 11%. I think there's a lot to be taken out of that, and something we'll all have to consider as an industry going forward. So again, I just want to thank my panel, Nick, Ger and Matt for coming today, and thank Anne-Marie for inviting us. So enjoy the rest of the conference. I'm going to hand back to Damien.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amy. Really upbeat session there. Well done to you guys, and the very best of luck to you in the future. Now, every few years, the ASA honours a member who has made a significant contribution during their career to the Irish agri-food sector. And this year's Distinguished Member Award, sponsored by AIB, really needs very little introduction. Maybe we'll give you a couple of clues. She was the first graduate in agricultural economics in UCD in 1980, and then began a very distinguished career in the media, working as a researcher on The Late Late Show, followed by being the presenter of Ear to the Ground, the very first presenter of Ear to the Ground, and don't forget Celebrity Farm as well. She moved on, of course, to write for the Farmers Journal and became editor of the Farming Independent before running for politics in 2004 and becoming Ireland's longest-serving MEP from 2004 until 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, the ASA Distinguished Member Award goes to EU Commissioner Mairead McGuinness.
Well, firstly, a big thank you to the Agricultural Science Association and to President Anne-Marie Butler for this very big honour. And I really am surprised but pleased to get this award. I have to say that my biggest joy comes from receiving a beautiful oak tree. And I hope that gives us all a message about what we all need to be doing for the future as we look to this more sustainable path that we're all on. The Agricultural Science Association means a lot to me personally, and it is a network that lasts for a lifetime. So to whoever was involved in this, from the president right across the association, a sincere thank you. And of course to AIB for their sponsorship. But I shall treasure this tree and I shall add trees to it.
And congratulations to Mairead McGuinness. You know what? It just shows the caliber of ASA members that it took Mairead so long to actually receive that award. We're moving on now to the final session of the ASA conference. And we're going to look at science and the role of science in tackling climate change and also in continuing to support and develop innovation in agri-food. And I'm going to hand you over now to the very capable former president of the ASA, Professor Karina Pearce.
Thank you very much, Damien, and welcome everyone, as Damien has said, to our final session in this year's ASA conference. I think the earlier sessions have certainly given us food for thought. They've been thought-provoking, and they've highlighted, I think, many of the challenges faced by the industry. We've heard a lot about climate change, biodiversity, water quality, social licence, and many other issues have arisen. But there are also opportunities, and given the pasture-based nature of our production system, I think Ireland is well placed to meet those challenges and also to capitalise on the opportunities. So in this session, our theme is Science in Action, and we have an esteemed panel who will give their views on science and innovation and how they will offer solutions to the challenges faced by our industry. So first off, I'm going to introduce Dr. Alison Van Eenenum, who is a cooperative extension specialist in the field of animal genomics and biotechnology in the Department of Animal Science at University of California, Davis. And unfortunately, Alison has to join us remotely today, but thank you very much, Alison, for being with us. Also, well known to many of us, of course, is Bill Callanan, who is Chief Inspector at the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. And also delighted to welcome Professor Frank O'Mara, also well known to us, who's Director Designate of Teagasc and has been Director of Research in Teagasc for more than 10 years. As you have been doing up until this point, if you have questions, please put them into the Q&A box and we will hopefully get some time towards the end of the session to address some of those questions. So Alison, we're going to firstly deal with you, but we have a question actually before we do, which is a third question for our audience today. And that is, what is the biggest challenge facing European agriculture when seeking to compete in the global marketplace? So that is our third question today. So Alison, thank you very much firstly for being with us this morning. I know you're 8 hours behind us here in Ireland, so it really is the middle of the night for you. So we're very, very grateful for your time. You have a presentation for us, a short presentation on the interdependence of sustainability, innovation and science communication around animal agriculture to get us started. So we'll start with that and then we'll talk to Bill and Frank after that stage, okay?
Good morning, Ireland. This is Alison Van Inenham coming to you from UC Davis in California. And I'm actually recording this in advance of the meeting because you've scheduled me at 2 a.m. Pacific time. And so I thought I might be a little bit more cheerful if I recorded this during the day. I'm going to be speaking about one of my favorite topics today. No, not rumens, but the interdependence of sustainability, innovation, and science communication around animal agriculture, with a particular emphasis on genetics. And of course, breeders have selected for desired changes, which have resulted in remarkable alterations to the wolf to give us our domestic pet population. But it becomes pretty serious when we start looking at the improvements that have been made in food producing species. And shown here over time is the yield of corn. And you can see these inflection points that have been resulting from the adoption of new innovation in breeding programs, whether it be hybridization or in the last 20 years or so, genetically modified organisms. And a similar story can be told for animal agriculture. Shown here, dairy cattle yield over time. And what we see again is an inflection point that's been enabled by the introduction of the technology of artificial insemination back in 1940s, which of course enabled more elite sires to be used widely, with the resulting increase in yield that about fourfold increase relative to what it was in the 40s. And what's been the result of that is shown here on this slide, where you can see back in the 40s, there were around about 26 million dairy cows in the US. And as a result of increasing yield, that number has dropped from 26 million to around 9 million today. But at the same time, the total milk production has increased from around 50 million tonnes up to 100 million tonnes, even whilst we've decreased the cattle population by many millions. What's the result of that? Well, some calculations suggest that because we've got fourfold increase in milk production, today, we have only about 21% of the animals eating 23% of the feed, 35% of the water, on 10% of the land, producing 24% of the manure relative to 1944 values. And very simply put, the carbon footprint of a glass of milk in the US today is about 1/3 of what it was in 1944. And if you do that math more generally, and I'm just going to pick the year of 2017 for the US, this is the production of soy and corn, milk and broiler meat. And this is how much land was required and how many million or billion head were required in the case of broilers. If we had stayed with 1950 production methods and genetics, how much land would be required if we were to produce this same amount of yield that we produced in 2017? And that's shown in this column. And it's really the difference is what I would consider the opportunity that's been enabled by the adoption of innovation in agriculture. And effectively, we'd need 48 million additional hectares around about the landmass of California to grow that amount of soybean using the yields of the 1950s. We'd additionally need the entire state of Texas, or 120 million hectares, to grow that amount of corn using 1950s methods. And just to put that land acreage in context, in the EU, that's about 173 million hectares of agricultural land, which is about equivalent to this, 168 million hectares. So we'd need the entire agricultural land of the EU to grow the additional soy and corn that we produced using 2017 production methods. We'd additionally need 31 million head of dairy cattle, about the entire cattle population of the country of Australia. And we'd need a stunning 4.4 billion additional head of broilers and an additional 30 billion kilograms of feed, because they're less efficient feed conversion ratio associated with those 1950s broilers. So that's some pretty big opportunities that's been enabled by the adoption of innovation. And of course, recently, we've had some amazing innovations in genomics, and we had the introduction of genomic selection into the dairy industry in around about 2009. And what that enabled was the selection of bulls that were very elite based on their genotype and how lucky they got in the Mendelian segregation of beneficial alleles from their parents. And so what we see here is another inflection point where we basically have a doubling of the rate of genetic gain as it relates to the net merit index, which is an index that's used to determine which are the best animals in the breed. And that index also has been innovating and improving over time. And if we look at the net merit index of Holsteins in the United States today, less than half is actually dedicated to production traits, and a stunning 0.7% is devoted to milk production. Because really, it's not milk we're producing, it's fat and protein. But I think more importantly, more than half of the index is now dedicated to functional traits, including feet and udder composition, fertility traits, productive life, livability, resilience, if you will, and health traits. And here we're making tremendous progress. And I'm going to give you some Irish examples here, and looking at the disease of bovine tuberculosis, where the Irish Cattle Breeding Federation is now incorporated resistant tuberculosis into their indexes. And there are also work being done with genome editing, my particular favorite topic at the moment, where there's collaborators between Irish researchers and the company Recombinetics to basically try to develop genome editing solutions for bovine tuberculosis. And so all of that is a really positive sustainability story that I think we don't toot our own horns enough about. And overall, I'd say it's a big win for science. But boy, that's not the story you hear everywhere. I overheard these two ladies having a discussion in New York City.
So the latest thing is that there is now a move away from proven bulls. That's bulls that have grown up and shown us what they can do by fathering some daughters. Basically, we can scan so much genetic information so quickly now that breeders are moving to something called the genomic bull. So that's where you have a bull who has never fathered any calves, but you put his DNA on something they call a bovine chip, and it lets you look at 800,000 different genetic markers. And all of that information allows you to give the bull a lifetime net merit score, even before he's ever sired a calf to prove his worth.
In a weird way, it's like plant research. With genetic markers, we don't have to grow a full corn plant to know what it's going to be like. That technique has become really important in agricultural research. But applied to cattle, it's efficient, sure, but it's also kind of disturbing.
Yeah, kind of like a Gattaca thing where there's this genetically inferior underclass that gets culled.
That's kind of what animal breeders do. The whole point is the good ones get to have offspring. And so I think that discussion is just so interesting. And how can we actually explain the importance of these innovations to something that does resonate with the general public? And I want to just give you a little anecdote here for a workshop I gave in Canada back in 2016 with an urban audience, where I just asked the question, which of these three systems is sustainable, with no further context whatsoever? And these pictures were shown to them. Obviously, we're talking pig production here. And I gave them clickers so they could weigh in and give me their opinion as to which system is sustainable. So which system do you think is the most sustainable? In this audience, without any further context, the majority picked the second system, the system where the animals are outside in more natural environment, if you will. And then I asked this audience, which of the three pillars of sustainability is the most important to you? The interacting pillars of environment, economics, and social equity. And when I posed that question to them, and many audiences I've spoken to since, almost invariably, the majority say environment is really important. It's the most important goal. And then if you go back and give just a little bit more context, in this case, I explained what these systems were, and this is all based on a paper out of Sweden looking at sustainable development of food production, and explained that the first system optimized product quality and safety, the second was improved animal welfare, and the third decreased the impact on the environment. And again, asked that audience, which of these three systems would you pick? And interestingly, there was a change where now they picked the third system, which more aligned with what they said was their most important goal of sustainability. And I think that it's really incumbent on us as scientists to effectively communicate the benefits resulting from innovations in agricultural production systems, because if we don't, we're going to lose access to them. And that's going to have a detrimental effect on the sustainability of agricultural systems globally. That's why I do a lot of public outreach and participate in things like developing the movie Food Evolution that was discussing the GMO debate and trying to provide some context to explain what the technology is and what the potential benefits are associated with it. So I look forward to the questions and listening to the rest of the presentations. Thank you again for inviting me to attend your conference.
Excellent, Alison. Thank you very much. Bill, I'm going to turn to you at this point, and I think Alison has really given us an excellent presentation and a very clear view, I suppose, on the role of science and technology, how it has, played such an important role and is doing so in revolutionising food production and driving efficiencies in animal agriculture. But can I ask you to step back a little bit from that again, and just in terms of, I suppose, the significance or the challenges faced by the industry currently. Maybe talk us through some of that.
Yeah, thank you very much. But I suppose, look, at distilling all of what we've heard today, from the various speakers, like it's very clear and obvious that there's a lot more demands on agriculture, and particularly in terms of the use of land going forward, that will have to be addressed by the industry. For me, working in policy, there's a number of key drivers that are out there. So the European Fit for 55 policy direction, similarly with the Programme for Government and its expectation in terms of delivery. And I suppose what I would see in terms of just some of the key challenges and the best articulation of those is within the Food Vision report, which was recently launched by the Minister. And the authorship of that is from a broad group of stakeholders, including industry, farmers, business, etc. And really what that's identifying is, as a direction of travel, is the need for a food systems approach, integrating the importance of food and health, and with your own questionnaire that became evident as well, and similarly the food production and the environment and the interconnectedness of those. So that vision statement, and I just urge people to read the summary, it's a very short summary, it gives a good flavour. It really articulates what is the challenges before us. For me, I work in the area of environment, and you've heard it consistently, whether it's Minister McConalogue, whether it was Michael Scannell, whether it was Tom Vilsack, they all had the same message, that in the production of food, we have to be more conscious of the environmental footprint that accrues to it. I think nationally, we have a very good story to tell in terms of that, in terms of pastoral-based systems, pressure on water, the availability of water in particular, which is a worldwide issue. We have a generally good story in terms of it, but let's be clear, the trends have been in the wrong direction, and that's not something that I suppose we can accept, or that general society will accept, So from us, I suppose, in terms of direction of travel and environment, we see, for example, on climate, the importance of reducing our footprint, also the importance of removing carbon as well, and finally, contribution to energy. And one of the issues I see, certainly by 2050, as going to be particularly important, is that whole issue of how we remove carbon through a management of land, soils, forestation, all those sort of issues. Because a carbon neutral Europe in 2050 will have residual emissions, whether it's from airplanes or your vintage tractor. And they will be looking to ways of removing carbon. Harry Clark mentioned that 2 ways of doing this are carbon capture and storage, but also separately, how do you actually build carbon in soil and take carbon out of the system through our land?
Key actions, Bill, in that, what do you see as those key actions?
Well, I suppose when I look at the likes of the emissions that are out there, and we'd be looking for Frank in terms of solutions on some of those, but like realistically, methane has to be front and center because it's 20% of national emissions. How do we reduce methane overall? It doesn't matter what the metric you use in relation to the calculation of methane, the principle of reducing it is still there, okay? Nitrous oxide then associated with fertilizer, manures as well, is another big one. How do we build systems that effectively are less dependent on nitrogen, chemical nitrogen applications, as critical? And finally, I suppose that removal piece, how do we build, how do we support farmers in terms of, carbon capture and those opportunities that will arise, I think, as time goes on. And that will not just be by regulation. I think I just want to impress, and particularly on that carbon removal piece, there will be market drivers to that. What do we mean by that? I think everybody can just turn on the television and hear somebody is claiming, we are carbon neutral in some format or another. And the way that they will encourage or see that is almost having some elements of carbon offsets and reducing their own impact. On that carbon offset piece, I think the science around how to, I suppose, confirm and make sure that there's validity in terms of people's claims, and that is going to be critical into the future, and it's something that we'd be looking at the likes of Teagasc in terms of validation of that.
Yeah, I think there's, I suppose, quite a lot of debate really around maybe the cost of some of these actions that you talk about, Bill, at farm level. So will the department, or incentivise, I suppose, farmers or the uptake of those actions at farm level?
Well, look, it behoves everybody, I think, to support that direction of travel and be clear on it and how it can be done, and it's through practical on-farm interventions that'll be achieved. So it'll be a market and government support type regime, I would see, into the future, because I just don't see, look, at the CAP alone can deliver all these objectives. The marketplace will have to endorse it. We heard it earlier, from previous speakers that, if the consumer is expecting, the credibility of sustainability, then they must be willing to support it. And I suppose where we would be as regulators in particular would be generating the evidence base that confirms that. We just listened to Board BIA, like you can make sustainability claims, but they have to be robust, and they have to be supported by evidence, and that's critical. And I suppose that's where we would certainly see, look at in terms of either research or other actions. How do we support the development of this sort of baseline information, the quantification of the improvement that the likes of Frank, etc., will be working on delivering, and translate that into an understandable metric, or the inventory, whichever we want to do, that we have, I suppose, credibility in what claims we make.
Okay, Bill, and before, Frank, I move on to you, I suppose an easy question, and that given the challenges that you've outlined, what will the industry look like in 5 or 10 years' time? So, for you, Bill.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
I had to hand over. I think, look at, Michael Scannell identified the optimism, and I would similarly have optimism. That's articulated in the food vision, which is the industry's own ambition in terms of it, but it will, to deliver on that, require significant investment by us all to, I suppose, improve some of the metrics that are out there. Some of that will be encouragement, some will be regulation. So what I mean by that is, like if you look at typical sectors, and we look at, for example, dairying, I've asked questions of, are we breeding the most carbon efficient cow? We can't have a system that, dairy calves from a social responsibility point of view aren't transferable to a beef system. It's just not going to be acceptable. And separately, we can't have a dairy system that's, I suppose, very dependent on very high levels of nitrogen. And on the beef industry, it's about earlier slaughter of animals so that they're more efficient in terms of coming through. That'll be issues like breeding and management. That'll contribute to that. On the tillage sector, it's all about, you put a crop into the ground, for example, spring corn in the spring, and it's out of it in 4 or 5 months. Issues like cover crops and more efficient application of manures, etc., will all feed in to how that sector will contribute. So each different sector will have to contribute to actions that, I suppose, support its sustainability claims and reverse the trends that are there. So for this autumn, very clearly, we will have at government level the development of a new climate action plan, building on the 2019 plan, the review of the nitrates regulations, and also the development of CAP in areas like biodiversity. So they're the policy drivers that will be coming at us, I suppose, as the year progresses.
Okay, thanks, Bill, and we'll come back to some of those areas as well. So, Frank, Bill is putting it up to you there, I think, in terms of, the science and the innovation that is going to be necessary, I suppose, to deliver pathways to solutions for the many challenges and significant challenges that he's outlined. So, I suppose you're coming into an extremely important position now as Director of Teagasc in the coming weeks. So, where do you see the key technologies, or what do you see as the key technologies and innovations that offer those pathways to solutions? And where do you see the greatest potential?
Okay, well, look, I suppose the first thing, that we have to keep sight on, the biggest technology or the biggest application of science is really how you organise your system. And in Ireland here, for our agricultural systems, we have organised them around making best use of grass, our big natural resource. And we've done a very good job. We have a very different system than the system Alison outlined, for dairy production, or indeed even beef production, than they have in the US. And that's because we're maximising the way we are optimizing the way we use our natural resources to make best use of grass. And that has given us a really sustainable system in many respects. You know, it's very good in terms of the carbon that we're capturing into the grasslands. It's very good in terms of the carbon footprint when we look at the emissions. It's actually not bad in terms of water quality. It's very good for animal welfare and so on. But that's not to say that we're in a happy place, because any industry that stands still is really going backwards. So we're on a journey, and sustainability, environmental sustainability, is going to be a very, very big part of the journey of our industry over the next decade. And in terms of the pathways or the areas in which technology can contribute or can assist that, look, there are many. And if we talk maybe about the climate area, which is probably the big challenge of our time, really the pathways there are, number one, it's going to be around efficiency and this thing of organizing our system to best effect. Number two, it's technologies that we can bring to bear on it. So things like we talk a lot about protected urea or different fertilizer types that can reduce emissions. We talk about feed additives that have promise for reducing methane emissions and so on. So technologies like that might contribute. And then we have the whole role of carbon capture. And globally, land is one of the big areas where carbon can be captured and stored. So that's going to be of increasing importance. And whether it's in soils or whether it's in hedges or whether it's in trees or forests or whatever, that's going to be a very important area for the future. And the last area is an area where I suppose hasn't developed terribly well in Ireland, is the whole land use for biofuel production. And but I would see that over the coming years we're probably likely to see some movement in that, whether it's biogas or biomethane or just what we're already doing, I suppose, the use of wood for heat and so on. And maybe the last area just to throw in, and just going back maybe to the earlier discussion this morning about the story of horticulture in New Zealand. And here in Ireland, diversification obviously has to be something that we consider as well. It's centre of the new food vision strategy. The opportunities are not huge at the moment in terms of land use, at least in the short term. But I think we have to look at that whole area and see, are there opportunities for diversification? They're not going to be big land uses unless it's something, obviously like biogas or whatever. But let's look at them and see what role they might play as well.
And when you say look at them, Frank, in what way, I suppose, is that from a research perspective? Is it from a modelling perspective? How do we develop maybe those alternatives and diversify a little bit, as you suggest there?
Yeah, well, look, I think it's not just about research. We've quite a bit of research done on things like biogas and all of that. So we really know what needs to be done. It's about now putting a program in place, and that requires some industry, some government support and so on. And again, in things like the horticulture area, over the last couple of years, these are only small things, but we've made great progress in things like cut foliage here. From a kind of a standing start, we've developed a nice industry in that now. It doesn't use much land or anything like that, but it creates a lot of jobs for people in rural areas. I think an area that my horticulture colleagues tell me is ripe, pardon the pun, for exploitation is the whole area of apple production. So we're going to see, can we support that industry through advisory effort over the coming years, and there will, I'm sure, be other opportunities as well that will emerge.
Thank you. Alison, you're waiting patiently there in the middle of the night over in California, so I want to bring you into the conversation if I can. I suppose, you're very aware, I know you've published in this area as well, of the conservative, we'll say, stance that the EU has on certain technologies that offer significant potential and opportunity. And I suppose you've alluded to those in your presentation. I suppose a question, and maybe for Frank as well, that, from an Irish or European perspective, are we trying to compete at a global level with one hand tied behind our back? I'd be very interested maybe in getting your views on that.
Yeah, well, I guess, and I think we're probably obtusely referring to the use of molecular technologies in breeding, and so GMOs and genome editing more generally. And I think that what is missing from the conversation is the kind of the trade-offs associated with not allowing access to innovations. And I tried to outline that in my talk a little bit, is that often people would just have a blanket opposition to something. The trade-offs haven't been well discussed. And I think there's been a lot of discussion today about quantification of basic metrics to do with sustainability. And I think the the foregone opportunity cost of not allowing use to these technologies has to be more clearly articulated by scientists, because actually, if we are going towards more sustainable systems and we're not allowing safe technologies that can enable us to get there, we are kind of shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. And that I think agricultural scientists are uniquely positioned to be the ones that have that discussion, because we do understand the systems. And I think it's a real communications challenge that we face, and something that we need to address. Otherwise, we will have less sustainable systems than we could have otherwise.
Thank you. Frank, I might just bring you in on that.
Yeah, look, I suppose as a scientist, I would say it'd be great to have access to these tools, and hopefully we will in the not too distant future. But we can make huge progress without the biotechnology tools as well. And Alison, in her presentation, she showed the increase in the dairy index. I can't remember, was it the net worth or whatever was the name, but and look, that could have been our index, the economic breeding index for dairy cows, which again has grown tremendously in the last number of years, has the same inflection point when we introduced genomic selection, I think just 1 year after it was introduced in the US. So look, without the gene editing or the genetic modification, we can make fantastic progress and have made fantastic progress. But there's no doubt there are things that we can't do without it. And one good example is which very much talks to the farm to fork strategy. We did an experiment, part of a European experiment a number of years ago on potatoes resistant to blight. And we were able to cut the pesticide usage from 13 sprays to 2 sprays in the year. So, a massive impact on the amount of pesticide used. And that technology is obviously not available in the EU. The whole gene editing, the newer technology, obviously there are opportunities through that technology on maybe things like welfare, such as removing horns on calves and getting rid of that need to dehorn calves, or indeed people tell me shortening tails in sheep and so on. So look, there are things that you could do that, as Alison said, if people understood the benefits maybe from either an animal welfare or an environment point of view, it might give them a different view about those technologies and their utilities. I guess the hope for them here in Europe is there has been a lot of examination of the role of those technologies by the Commission, and there's been a number of reports published in the last couple of months, and those reports certainly do recognise the advantage for both animal and plant breeding that these technologies could bring. So look, I think we're on a process of discussing within the EU what is the role for those technologies. So I would be optimistic that at some point in the not too distant future we will have those, and we have made sure we have the capability in Teagasc, and it's in the universities as well, to take advantage of those technologies if and when we can.
Okay, Bill.
Yeah, look, I'm not going to insert myself into a policy debate about GM, etc., but I'd just make a couple of observations. That when I look at science, I think we have to come at it from a different objective, and I think almost COVID has taught us a few lessons. But one of the issues that arose in terms of GM is that I suppose it was perceived as profit-driven. It was perceived almost as whether it's big industry driving it, and there's an absolute necessity for profit. But I think as we kind of look to the likes of gene editing and consideration of that, I think how it will be viewed in terms of human health may influence people's approach to it in terms of areas like agriculture. But critically above anything is that I think we better need to articulate the value for societal objectives as opposed to profit drivers in terms of anything we do. And, if we look at the development of vaccines and COVID and the uptake, which is particularly high, it's true a perceived societal benefit arising from that. So any sector must consider any new technology, I think, from that prism. What's the benefit, let's say, societally, rather than just a profit.
Alison, do you want to come back in on that?
I'm glad you guys have a high level of vaccine uptake. I'm not sure I'm sitting in a country that I can say the same for. I think what's been interesting with COVID is just the appreciation for what misinformation and disinformation can do to sound policy and public opinion. And I think that we really need to look at how people are being influenced by this, because I would argue that the whole debate around GMOs was actually driven by misinformation and competing business interests. And yes, it was largely the purview of large multinational companies, but that was because the regulatory requirements were insane. And, you know, it was treated as if it was plutonium instead of a breeding method. And so if, in fact, we go with the same regulatory approach for gene editing, then I will argue it also will be the purview of large multinational companies, and we similarly won't be able to use it in agriculture again. And that comes with all of the, you know, the opportunity costs of things we could have addressed with it. Disease being a beautiful example. You know, the blight-resistant potato is a gorgeous example, but so too is the disease-resistant papaya in Hawaii, developed by public sector and given for free to the farmers. You never hear that story, but it exists and it's true, and it saved them from a disease that was basically decimated the industry. And so why is that narrative not more common? Why do we only hear the narrative of the negative? And I think that that's where, you know, what is it about the negative that sells so well, and can we insert a narrative that actually addresses how this could be used for beneficial purposes?
No, very good point. I just saw a quote there recently from Jack Bobo. I think it was, if people trust you, the science doesn't matter. And if people don't trust you, the science doesn't matter. So that can be, you know, a very difficult thing to deal with. And then, you know, to effectively communicate and to deal with mistrust and to deal with the communication around sort of difficult topics. But Frank, I suppose at the heart of it, you need sound science, I suppose.
You do. Look, and just that conversation, and even just reflecting on the word gene editing, we'll say it's not a great term to describe it. This is like precision breeding is what we're talking about here. But gene editing, you can see from a consumer point of view, it's not a great word in my view. But anyway, going back to your question about the communicating science and that, look, I think we've seen great examples of good science communication in this country over the last 18 months from our colleagues in the medical field. And I think, you know, some of them were outstanding in terms of the way that they communicated on COVID. And you know, they were all very good communicators and trusted. And you might say, well, sure, look, the science didn't matter. Sure, you know, Luke O'Neill is very popular, well trusted. But look, what he had and what others had was, you know, they had the science. People accepted they had credibility because they knew what they were talking about. And I think for us as scientists, we always have to try to stick to the facts. And some of us are better at communicating than others. But if as scientists we try to stick to the facts and give a balanced view, I think that's the contribution that we can make. And we have to try to get into this position where we are trusted by the rest of society, that yes, I feel they're giving me the full picture, and I feel that I can make up my mind now on the basis of the facts that I've just heard there.
The only thing I'd add to that, Frank, though, is, and I fully agree with you, is they're very, very good communicators, and they're good communicators of science, but that's built on evidence, and critically putting that evidence and the capacity to put it out there. So when I look at new politics, I think we have to better articulate, and for me, let's say, as a civil servant, is articulating the problem and identifying the issues around it so that people can understand it. I use it as a kind of a maxim that I have an older gentleman retired locally, and I was just talking to him, and he just said the thing versus when he was young is everybody challenges authority now as a first principle. Doesn't matter whether it's the guard, the teacher, the church, you know, there's a skepticism, and a healthy skepticism that's important. The only way that's overcome is the evidence. And effectively that then, aligned with good communication, becomes a very, very important messaging. But I suppose for us, in terms of the way we work, how do we collect the evidence that A, informs good policy decision, and separately then is able to articulate that it's working?
Yeah. And Frank, you mentioned earlier, I suppose, bringing it back maybe to closer to home a little bit in terms of, you know, many of the technologies that we have available. Some are maybe in terms of readiness a little bit more ready than others. We might go back to that again. And just, I suppose, what's key, we build evidence, we've science and research, but the adoption and practice change at farm level is really key to that. And I suppose you're coming in again into a very important position. What are your plans in that regard? What are the big initiatives that Teagasc have or will have in terms of driving that practice and adoption change at farm level?
Yeah, well, just to before I get into the practice and adoption change, look, I think it's really important to have what we call this pipeline of technologies coming through. So these are ready to adopt or ready to use technologies. And look, we actually have quite a menu or selection of those around the big issues of our time. So, for instance, for greenhouse gases, we published this famous MAC curve, you know, with over 20 measures in it that can be taken to reduce emissions. But we have a pipeline of other technologies that are, some of them are quite near to being ready to be adopted, others will take a bit longer. And look, so I think that's important to recognise. In terms of the adoption of technologies that we know about, things like the clover or protected urea or low emission slurry spreading or whatever it might be that we'd want to look at. The big initiative that we've brought forward in collaboration with all of industry now is the signpost program that we launched a few months ago. And that's where really we're going to work with 100 demonstration farms, and we know that demonstration farms work as a method to influence other farmers. We'll work with those around the adoption of these technologies, the use of these technologies, again, collecting the evidence as to the impact that those technologies are having on those farms, and using that hopefully to springboard the other 100,000 farmers in the country into adopting those technologies as well. There'll be a huge role for communications around that and a huge role for partnership, and that's why we're really delighted that all the dairy co-ops and all the meat processors, all the farm organisations and media have come in behind this initiative. And we would hope that over the next couple of years, that's the kind of model of involving everybody in partnership and having a common focus, that we can achieve progress in terms of the adoption of
because all of those partners, I suppose, their role then in dissemination, it's moving it beyond the 100 farms that are involved. Then I suppose it's ensuring that everybody across the sector has access and engages with that information.
And look, we have to recognise we're only one bit of the whole influence and decision influencers of farmers. Like the people that sell inputs have a huge influence on farmers. The people that buy their product have a huge influence on farmers. The Department of Ag have huge influence. So I suppose, look, what we're trying to do is trying to marshal that, make sure that we play our role as effectively as we can, but try to coordinate and make sure that everybody is I suppose, working towards a common goal in relation to this.
That is an area, look, we will be supporting, in terms of training our advisors, private advisors, Teagasc advisors, business advisors, so that there's a very clear understanding of what are the objectives you're trying to achieve. Practically, what are those on farms, and making sure that farmers understand, well, look at not just what they have to do, but why it's being done.
Yeah. Look, I know we're running really short on time, and I think we could spend much more time today discussing many of the areas we've gone into, but I know that we've unfortunately come to an end. I see questions coming in here, and I suppose maybe some of them you might say are reflective of sort of the role of agriculture and carbon sequestration. Is that further enough advanced, or is the industry getting enough credit for that? They're the kind of questions that I see coming in. But as I say, unfortunately, we've hit our stop. So I suppose at that, I'm going to have to thank our panel. And before I finish, I know that we have our question that we asked earlier about the biggest challenge facing European agriculture when seeking to compete in the global marketplace. And I suppose A was technological constraints, and that's 9%. B, scale was 10%. Cost competitiveness was 45%, and regulations 36%. So again, I think there's a clear message in that for C and D around cost competitiveness, and regulations are going to be, I suppose, the biggest challenges faced by the sector. So look, again, I'd like to thank our panel, thank the audience for the many questions we unfortunately couldn't get to, but thank Dr. Alison Van Eenenum over in University of California, Davis, for getting up in the middle of the night to talk to us, and look forward to, Alison, when restrictions lift. We've promised you a visit to Ireland, and hopefully, I get to make up for not being able to be here this year. To Bill Callanan and to Professor Frank O'Mara, thank you very much for your time and your contributions today. And Damien, I'm going to pass back over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, and well done, Karina, and to Alison, and to Bill, and to Frank, and the very best of luck to you, Frank, in your demanding role which lies ahead. Well, I'm afraid that brings almost to a close the 2021 Agricultural Science Association Conference. We do have a couple of little bits of news for you. While we didn't enjoy the wonderful banquet that we do every year, last night. The Captain's Prize, the President's Day golf tournament did go ahead in Kilkenny. And the winner in the men's section, sponsored by Dawn Meats, was Dennis Herlihy. Congratulations to Dennis. And the winner of the ladies' prize was Denise McKenna. Congratulations to Denise. And the gross prize winner was Brian Daly. So well done to you all, and I hope you had a great day there in Kilkenny Golf Course yesterday. Well, as I said, that brings proceedings to an end for this year. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have a take-home message from our wonderful lineup of speakers. Well done, and thank you to all of our guests for their time this year, and to my colleagues, Amy and Karina, for steering the ship this morning. We really do hope that we'll all be together here this time next year. Fingers crossed for that. But we're going to leave you now by handing back to Anne-Marie Butler, who has a closing message for you this year.
As we reflect on the past 12 months, it's extremely heartening to see what ASA has continued to deliver for our members, despite the continued challenges. It was wonderful that we were able to continue the long-established tradition of the ASA mock interview experience. Sincere thanks and well done to all who participated, and thank you to the loyal interviewers who are so generously given of their time. It was a busy year for ASA. We continued to provide a tremendous amount of material online. While it is regrettable we couldn't meet face-to-face, it is great that we were able to continue those events, and they're still there for playback on the ASA website, so please continue to enjoy the detail. It was also wonderful under my presidency to introduce 2 new initiatives for ASA members: our ASA podcast and the ASA FBD Fellowship. The podcast goes from strength to strength. We thank those who participated and look forward to podcasts for the future. Thank you to Ulster Bank for their sponsorship, and we look forward to working with Dairygold for the next 12 months. For our ASA FBD Fellowship, we look forward to the announcement of our inaugural fellow at the conference. The fellowship is a very important initiative and step for ASA and for the agri-food sector at large. The fellowship recipient will be an individual who has a proven ability in science and an ability to develop further for the sector. We're delighted that ASA and FBD are there to support these individuals over the next number of years, and we look forward to further initiatives with FBD. I would like to sincerely thank ASA Council for their support. I'd like to wish George Ramsbottom the very best for the year ahead. And a particular thank you to Barbara McGoldrick, who keeps ASA to the front and centre at all times and has been a tremendous support to me and a great friend. So thank you to Barbara. Our ASA membership benefits were reviewed this year, and we're delighted to say we have a tremendous amount of benefits there. So please take the time to look at the benefits, make sure and avail of them as an ASA member, and enjoy. To those that are ASA members, thank you for your participation. To those who are not ASA members, can I encourage you to please explore and consider joining ASA. It's a wonderful opportunity with lots of benefits, lots of networking, lots of friends, and very important for ASA to have a voice and for our sector to have a voice. So thank you to all, and best wishes for the future.